Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for tonight's reaction to Andor, Season 2, Episodes 7, 8, and 9. This is our Andor after show. We're excited to discuss all things Andor with you guys tonight, and hopefully, you guys brought some questions and some comments. This was what we've been waiting for from Andor Season 2. We had heard so much from the early reviews of the season that the final 6 episodes were just peak Star Wars, and boy, if the last 3 are like tonight, we're in for one of the most crazy consecutive arcs in all of Star Wars history. Because I thought this was fantastic. I loved these 3 episodes. I thought it might be the best stretch of any part of Andor so far. This was just all of Andor's highs in one place, everything that it can do, whether it's action, excitement, uh, political thriller, all that type of stuff. Every vibe, every tone, every set of characters, all of it was at its peak here in these 3 episodes and absolutely lived up to my hopes and my expectations. We're going to get into everything, full spoilers. So again, if you guys are watching this live or you're watching on replay and you've not seen the episodes, please come back to it. We don't want to spoil how great these episodes were. We're going to go tonight for a little while here talking about these episodes. It is kind of based on our user base. It has been a difficult release schedule, as we talked about every week for Andor, and that does make it very difficult for a lot of the audience to be able to join us every night to talk about this and really just in general to stay caught up with this show. So hopefully, if a lot of you join us tonight, we'll go for a while and take your guys' questions, your comments, your theories. If not, we're going to hit a few talking points and then we'll get out of here and hopefully you guys enjoy the stream tomorrow when you view it. All right, let's get started tonight talking about this show. So we have the Gorman massacre finally. We all knew it was going to happen this week if you knew anything about Rebels and the dates around Star Wars when big events happen. It was the 2 BBY arcs, so therefore it was going to happen. I think both of us thought it was going to happen in episode 8, and it did happen in episode 8. We had the build up episode to it, all the final pieces coming into play with all our major characters, getting Cassie in there as well, getting the story going. And then we move into the Gorman massacre itself, which then also brings us to the Mon Mothma side of the story, which we also expected to be her giving her speech that ends up making her flee the Senate, which then gets her to the rebels from Star Wars Rebels, the Ghost Crew, in that episode of Rebels season 3. So we had a lot of stuff to cover here when it comes to some of the things we knew about in canon and some of the things that we didn't know were coming in canon. We also had one major retcon here. For the first time really in canon, there was a complete 100%, 180-degree flip retcon of something in Star Wars, and that was the meeting between Cassian and K2SO. For those of you unaware, there was a Cassian and K2SO comic book that came out in 2017 that previewed their meeting. That is no longer, at least if you're going by the old canon tiers from Star Wars Legends, that is no longer the explanation for how the two of them met. We'll talk about that at one point tonight as well as a major talking point. But we got a lot of things to discuss. But Sonic, let me pass it to you first, just right off the bat. What were your reactions watching tonight's episodes? What were your thoughts, and how did you like the entire arc here, and how did you appreciate it as just kind of a piece of television?
I mean, I almost appreciated like a whole piece of a movie because it was shot like that. It was cinematic. And you have to understand, while this is probably the most expensive Disney Plus show possibly ever made, and with the constraints that you're trying to do to make these stories feel so big, but also just a point in time every year, unlike how you could kind of work around, kind of live through the spaces and the sets that you're designing for Andor season one, they were always gonna have this very, very difficult bar to clear. They're gonna have their work cut out for them, and, I think for, like, 90 to 95% of what I was thinking they could pull off, they did, right? It was just a couple of things here and there that I was like, "Ah," and, I don't wanna start on the negatives here, but it's just, like, the one thing that I was a little surprised Andor would struggle with, but yes, they had so many people in the Gorman massacre and all that, but when you hear about the Tarkin massacre and then him landing and killing 500, and that's what the whole point of the memorial, it didn't necessarily feel like a magnitude more. Like, there was definitely crazier things like the KX droids kinda going around and just slapping people, and then they're flying in the air and dying, right? Like, yes, there was some very interesting horror, there was very manipulative things happening, it was very well made and shot. I was just surprised how small it felt, like, I wish we coulda kept seeing more, like, maybe another hour or so and everything. Um, there was a lot of season 1 payoff, in the Gorman Massacre, so I don't really mind that because there was some very satisfying and incredible acting there. But that was just the one thing I thought like, okay, is if the Tarkin massacre is Tarkin, at least in Legends, literally landing a ship on and killing all these Gormans, and that didn't really push Mon Mothma at that point, why necessarily is this? And I can see why, there's definitely a lot of different angles to it, sure, and I just wish there's a little bit more, like, we saw maybe a whole city up in flames, or at least the whole implication of, like, they're gonna start mining immediately. I wish we got to see some of that already start near the capital or something landing or something, just so, like, it's that there's no breathing room, like, this is a massacre of not just the Gorman people, but Gore itself, right? I that was the one thing I felt was I coulda seen a little bit more, and but, again, I'm nitpicking when it comes to the show. It was still really, really well done. I just happen to love, like, the Ferrix final fight just a little bit more than perhaps this, right? And it's because the intentions are very different. So the execution was a little bit more unexpected here, but still really well done. So those that was really my only major critique, and I guess you could say maybe the Mon Mothma stuff was a little bit more obvious because you already know a lot of, like, where it's gonna land, what's gonna happen here. Um, I didn't find it predictable per se, but I found it, like, very much like, let's, like, live in the character beats and moments that kind of flesh out what we already generally know is gonna happen here, right? So, that final episode is definitely like a palate cleanser. It is like how you said in our last live and our predictions, Liam, like, this was the aftermath, but
Mhm.
the aftermath of Gorman is just the start of it all for everybody else in the galaxy, especially in the heart of the galaxy. So, yes, I really did like it too as well, but I could definitely feel like, oh man, like the intensity of like those first 2 episodes had just kinda dropped down a little bit for me, and it's more about like just transforming and channeling all the passion that Mon Mothma has into now becoming the first real leader of the rebellion that's gonna be publicly facing, right? So, I really like this arc, absolutely. Those are really my only critiques to get those out of the way, and it's really just because I'm gonna dig into great art and see if there is anything there that I can think of possibly even critiquing. That's just what great art should always be kind of measured against. So, yeah, a fantastic arc. I love the buildup in that first episode. My god, just everything between Cyril and Dedra, it's just fascinating. This is disgusting in so many ways, and just seeing, like, that scene of him finally realizing, like, everything that he and this is just the first episode alone, like, realizing, like, there's something absolutely terrible that I have just abetted, that I have been working towards a system that I didn't believe would do something like this, even though he really should have opened his eyes a little bit more. But yeah, just the fact that that confrontation was so physical and, like, sickening, like, I didn't wanna feel for Dedra, but I'm like, she's being choked out here, and then you see some of the fanaticism and the desperation. You see some of like, oh man, maybe Cyril really just meant well. It's just, is it really is it just about what he learned versus what's innate, right? Like, it's like so much conflicted, uneasy feelings, which is what makes it so incredible. And that's what really led up everything so well into Garmin Massacre for me. I think seeing them and their reluctances, their differences in opinion amongst each other with the empire itself, I thought was great knowing that they're like, "We're Fall Guys, but we'll get rewarded, but at what cost? And what have I told?" And it was just it was so well done. So that's what made once you see all the little buildup of like, "Oh, you brought in green soldiers. Oh, you've got a sniper who's gonna take that first shot." But once you see all these little things, you're like, "Oh, like, my god, like, I can see why they're disgusted because it's no longer about them. They found even crazier, even more fascist, even more absolutely insane people, and all you have to do is say the word "the Emperor" a couple times and say Krennic is getting impatient and this is it, like, go, and you realize, like, yeah, maybe because 'cause I've been following these characters, I have a little bit of, like, warmth for them just to see what they do in their life, but that's not the way Star Wars goes, and in a saga full of space wizards and hokey religions, like, these normal-ish people aren't gonna, have anything nice or gentle about what's gonna be happening to them, right? They're just another piece of it all. So, fantastic to see that. Um, I was actually very surprised by all the Yavin stuff, and I think at this point, I'm actually a little surprised about how they've handled Bix, right? Obviously, the first arc, straight up an attempted rape, but that, maybe you're pulling her out of, like, the torture, where she's lost and, like, kind of floating after everything in season 1. Then you come into the second arc, and you're just seeing her breaking and falling apart, and you're like, "Oh my god, it's, like, inevitable," and then she just snaps out of it and gets that satisfaction, doubles down with her commitment to her and Cassian together and kills Gorse, and you're like, "Oh, okay, so where's she going this 3rd arc?" She kinda continued playing, like, almost a housewife role, like, and I found that surprising. I thought maybe with, like, how Yavin is structured, how much, like, people are living in the jungle of Yavin itself, and it's not just everything inside the base, a little bit of the distance and the privacy that she does get to keep, I thought that would encourage her in some ways to, like, help where she can, right? Instead, it's almost like she's kinda just living there as they're not fully militarized, like, they're not in that desperation mode yet. So seeing her and then that relationship and how her and Cassian almost kinda went through that very spiritual journey and having the Force play a role in Cassian's story, and then almost the implication of, like, some of these shots of, like, Cassian hugging onto Bix and what he's looking at, you're like, "Oh my god, that's exact the look that he gives when he's hugging Jin as the beach is exploding around them on Scarif," right? All these little things that, like, you're like, "Oh my god." He might not see it, he might hate the idea that, like, he doesn't have control of his destiny, makes his own decisions, he might just be listening a little bit or allowing it to become self-fulfilling because he cares for Bix, whatever the reason is, the idea that you can almost insinuate through Gilroy's writing that, like, he's seeing what incredible things are gonna happen to him, but he can't really. He just knows in moments, glimpses, things like that, right? And then that young kid on Gorman that he had met in the last arc and come back, now he's been a little promoted to the front desk and all that, and he's like, "Rebellions are built on hope," and it's like, that's just eating on him, and it's like, "Oh god," and I think having that being the underlying foundation for why he's finally like, "You know what? No, like, I've been lucky. Forget about the Force, forget about, like, what I've been able to do." He's like, "Let me stop, like, I've done what I can. I've done more than what is expected of anybody. I have this still. Why let go of this relationship, this love that he has between him and Biggs?" And then for Biggs to walk away, right? And for Biggs to be like, he needs this. This is what he lives through. It was a little bit more conversation that she got with the healer, that he's the messenger, and then she can't rip him away from the rebellion, that she has to step away. Yeah, that was not a storyline I had any inclination or even desire of seeing. The Force being touched upon in Andor has always kind of been in the background, but it almost felt like, oh, even less of a weight than hearing about the Empire and the Emperor and all that. Just felt like, okay, that's like a thing that, these people, once they're amassing as a rebellion, might talk about here and there. But to, like, kinda have that moment and supercharge the direction of their personal arc together, and then for her to leave like that, I was like, "Wow." Right, like, now that's you've thrown so many wrenches into, like, what people expect, and the fact that Wilmon's alive, it's like, wow, alright, a lot of the candidates that people had, they're all there still, right? And you can see why, so badly why Cassian's like, "Let me quit. I have everything I have here," right? Like, this is it, right? This I should keep it. I've been lucky to keep it. And then to have it ripped away because of belief, faith, whatever it may be, and something greater and what casting can achieve and contribute to is like, that's a heart-wrenching storyline, and I hope it's not the end of Vix, but I thought that was a very strong arc from a story that I just didn't really think had much substance to kind of fit into Yavin, but, in a strange way, maybe the old EU purist in me kinda loves that Yavin 4 can be kind of the home for almost a spiritual Force-based story and not necessarily have to be with the Jedi here. I like some of that hints and nods there, inspirations there, so if there was something like that, I absolutely loved it. And then, Genevieve O'Reilly just absolutely knocked it out of the park. Just full command, Erskine, just having that character, that connection, continuity, Luthen kinda being tied into that, you're like, "Oh my god, just how much has this guy thrown into this web that's finally about to be unraveled?" And then, yeah, fantastic speech, I love that it ended with her just as the powers cut after she says Emperor Palpatine, it's like, it's over, everything's been structured, Luthen has helped her in some ways, even if he wouldn't have done that in season 1. And then you see Benjamin Bratt, and I'm like, "Oh, man, is this gonna work?" But I have to give him props. I really thought he nailed it. He got a lot of the accent right, some of the mannerisms. I don't see the pure idealist that I think Jimmy Smits can kinda project sometimes, like the smile, the warmth, the glow that he kinda has there. But for the role that he has to play as being like, "I'm doing this for the rebellion. I'm gonna be the hostage here willingly. I'm sure what you can do can be done." Yeah, great. If you're gonna play into, like, just the more realistic things about being a senator and just the dynamic and the tension that's brewing and all that, and maybe Bale doesn't really come off as, like, the suave guy twirling his cape in that moment, fine. Benjamin Bratt, if I close my eyes a little bit, I almost feel like it's Jimmy. So, props to him. I think he did a much better job here. I think the costuming definitely helped. I would have still loved a little bit more thicker, more wavier clothing for him, just to sell it a little bit more. But yeah, overall, if that was the thing that was going to pull down that final episode with how focused it was on Mon, he made sure that didn't happen. So fantastic arc. Straight up, this is a movie. People need to watch this before you watch Rogue One, and you would already get everything you kind of need, man. Like it's a fantastic summation and with so many new interesting ideas too that you're like, oh man, this supercharges everything leading into A New Hope.
Absolutely. Everything about this I really loved. I thought this was great top to bottom. I understand some of those criticisms about the Gorman Massacre itself, but for me, I didn't really have any of those. I think along with that final episode, I thought it was a smart decision, I guess starting with that episode 9. I thought it was a smart decision to go in this direction because the version of it we see in Rebels is immediately after this. So it's a nice continuation and like it heightens the stakes of a moment that's also just as big as the moment you see here. The birth of the rebellion in Star Wars Rebels via Mon Mothma, knowing that it started here with her burning the Senate down basically with her speech, declaring Palpatine as a tyrant and a murderer. That is just the Mon Mothma we've been waiting for. That's the Mon Mothma that's in all of the EU. That's the Mon Mothma that's in all of the New Republic era and all the stuff we've seen from her in canon thus far after the events of and through the events of the original trilogy. This was the Mon Mothma origin point, and you see her nervous about it. And I loved getting to live that moment with her. I love Cassian being involved in there. And I love her speech kind of being one of the things that helps build that confidence in him that maybe this is where he belongs. One of those things that when Bix leaves him probably drove him to take that next step to be a part of the awakening of K2SO and be in that moment and just kind of dedicate his life to the rebellion. It's the first time you hear him call him Captain Andor. So that promotion has come through. He is now fully a part of this thing. And I really loved the way they got him there. The Bix leaving, at first, I was also not a huge fan of it. I thought, okay, that's kind of a simple way to get rid of a character without killing her, but also who shouldn't be, involved in the final stories because of Rogue One and like that distance between losing Bix maybe in the next episode and or next arc and what Cassian would be like in Rogue One if next arc truly does build into like the opening scene of Rogue One. I thought it kind of is smart to give him that hope, right? The rebellions are built on hope thing that you get from the bellhop that is reiterated so many times in Rogue One that becomes the anthem of Rogue One that becomes such a key part of the Battle of Scarif. That same hope is there for Cassian that he's going to make it through and he's going to see Bix again at the end of the war. And I think that plays even stronger in his decision to go to Scarif with Jin, his decision to help steal the Death Star plans. It makes it even more tragic. And when they die on that beach, now you're going to be thinking about that Bix is waiting for him at the end of this war and he's not going to make it to her. And I would love to see maybe an epilogue. I don't know if they'll do one next week, but it would be great to see some type of little epilogue post Battle of Endor, post Battle of Jakku, and see where Bix is at and or what her reaction is, or if she does find out that Cassian dies immediately post Yavin, what's her reaction to that? I would love to see that come through, and maybe that's a story saved for another time. But I thought that was a really strong character decision, even if it's not necessarily the most exciting plot decision. I thought it was something that when I sat back and thought about it, I was like, man, this makes the character of Cassian even more tragic than he was before because he's lost everything in his life, his mother, his friends. He has nothing except the rebellion now, and that's the burden he's going to have to bear. And it just got all to me, a lot of the themes of the show, they all go back to that Luthen speech in season one about sacrifice and Bix sacrificing her future. She got her revenge. She's now trying to find her purpose after her revenge. And her purpose now, I guess, is to be the fire for Cassian, the spark for Cassian that gets him driven enough to work into the rebellion to the point where he ends up giving his life to steal the Death Star plans and changes the galaxy forever. He's that messenger. So I thought that was a really compelling way to send her off, even if it was one that felt kind of underwhelming at the time. But I sat on that one for a while after the episode, and I started to like it a lot more for the way Cassian kind of is awakened in that moment after he realizes she's gone, she's not coming back. So I thought that was great. I really loved that last episode. I just thought that's Tony Gilroy's bread and butter, the political thriller stuff, the speeches, the tension of walking through hallways with just people walking by, never knowing who's got a gun and who doesn't, never knowing when somebody's going to sneak around in the corner and ambush you, that type of tension that Tony Gilroy has been so great at building this entire show. He does it best when it's in these types of moments. It's not that the Gorman Massacre or Ferrex aren't incredible moments, but it's the Narkina Fives or the Coruscant Senate scene now that to me are like the way he stages those sequences. There's very few people who capture that the tone of these simple spaces like Tony Gilroy does. So I thought that was fantastic, and I thought the pacing, uh, the pacing worked so well, the tension worked so well, and I thought it was even better because I was so on the edge of my seat for two characters that I know absolutely make it through this. I knew Cassian's going to make it through. I knew Erskine's going to make it through. And I knew Mon Mothma was going to make it through. So three characters that I knew was going to make it through. And still I was on the edge of my seat. So I thought that was fantastic. And now going back to the Gorman Massacre itself, I thought it was so well handled. And I can understand the idea that it's not maybe as big or horrific, like in terms of numbers, as we might have expected, especially when you compare it to some other things. But I think now the symbolism of it, the way the Empire's starting to crack down and everything's starting to fizzle out, and you're seeing cracks within the Empire itself. You're seeing Dedra start to question it. She's trying to kind of postpone it the entire episode or both episodes because she knows what it's going to do to Cyril if he finds out about it. You see their relationship crumbling. You start to see the fractures within the Empire itself for this type of decision. You start to see the cracks and the crumbling of the Senate. You see all of that come to a head, and just the way this is televised, but it has people on both sides trying to create the narrative versus like when the Tarkin massacre happens. I would assume, even though we haven't seen it or read about it or anything, other than references in this show, that type of moment so early in the age of the Empire, there's still that hope and that love for the Republic and that hope that the Empire, maybe it's lost its way in wartime, but maybe it can come back to the ideals and the values that the Republic had pre-Clone Wars. And reading that or knowing about that, later, knowing what happens to the Empire, it's a bittersweet thing for sure. But I thought this worked really, really well with the way uh, it was presented here. I thought that just the scheming by the Empire, it was just more ruthless and brutal than even kind of expected. I expected them to just instigate some brick throwing, as you see in Ferrex or something like that, or instigate different conflicts here. But the way they trapped them in there and just created a slaughterhouse, I mean, it was definitely, like people referenced the airport scene in Modern Warfare 2. but just anything like that, it's not, it wasn't just an accident. This was completely fabricated. And I kind of expected it to be an accident that sets it off, even though it was fabricated for the last two arcs. I expected an accident to set it off, but everything being planned and staged, I think that makes it even more ruthless and more brilliant in the way it was constructed. And seeing those, you even feel bad for the Empire, right? They send the green rookies out to be slaughtered by these people
Yeah.
because they didn't want to waste their good soldiers, right? So they're sending these guys out and they're just like, we got to start a fight. And them being nervous, them being scared, that's going to create even more danger and more frustration with them. They're going to be afraid of these people because they've never been in conflict before. It's just all of that. I thought all of it was so smartly crafted, the way it all built on itself, the way Tony Gilroy had every little detail put together in this whole scene. I thought it was so good. And that's the thing about prequels, and I've said it so much through our reviews of these episodes, is that with prequels, you know what's going to happen, but the challenge is still making you compelled by what's going to happen, even though you know the ultimate outcome. The challenge is making you nervous for that to happen, right? Because you don't want to see it happen. And that's the thing that Tony Gilroy does so well in Andor, is every time it sets up a moment that you know what's going to happen ultimately with the outcome, you just are like on the edge of your seat waiting for it to finally set off, and what is it going to look like, even though I know what's going to happen. And I thought he did such a great job in this arc. And I really do think it's crazy to say because I wasn't a huge Cyril guy in season one, but Cyril and Dedra really carried a lot of the emotional weight of the entirety of the Gorman Massacre. Those two episodes are on the backs of Cyril and Dedra, and I really love what he did with Cyril in this season. I thought it was great, even though kind of predicted he was going to die. It still was so powerful, and just
Yeah.
Cassian, his last words to him, he's like, "Who are you?" And then you're kind of expecting Cyril to kind of have that moment where he's like, collects himself and just is like, "What am I doing?" Because he can't give up Dedra. Dedra's his drug. It's the Empire is his drug, even if he is somebody who sees all the faults in it. He doesn't want Dedra to be caught up in it. He still has feelings for her. She's the one that pulled him out of, his free fall, I guess, in his life, and he's the one that grounds her. And I do think Dedra's going to quadruple down on being evil next arc because I think she's going to blame the Empire, but she's going to blame the Gormans for this moment, because even though she knows that it was fabricated, she's going to blame the people for kind of brainwashing Cyril into thinking that this shouldn't happen. I think she'll double down on being evil. But man, what a death for him. It wasn't. And then that's another testament to Andor. It's a lot of times the deaths in Andor have been fantastic because they're not overwhelmingly like heroic or sad. They just happen. Whether it's they can't swim in Narkina 5, whether it's forgetting the guy's name, it gets crushed by the stuff in the ship and on Aldani, with the
Oh, yeah,
manifesto.
Nemec.
Nemec, yeah, all these deaths are just quick, and they don't leave you time to like build up to it. The audience isn't ready for it, and I think in that moment, even though I figured Cyril was going to die at some point, I wasn't fully ready for him to get shot in the head from behind. So yeah, I really love these episodes. These might be my favorite episodes of the show, especially number 8 and number 9. I just thought it was so good, and the build up to all of it I thought worked so well. And it's, again, just shows you that Andor is an interesting show. It's a show that, yes, maybe needs to be binged because it's so plotting and has so many details building up to these moments, and you get to these moments, and even though you waited 8 episodes to see them, it's just like, oh my god, like that was completely worth the wait. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on Cyril's death? Because I wanted to throw that in there as one of the talking points for the night, and then we're again, guys, going to turn it over to your guys' questions here pretty soon. So if you have questions, comments, anything you'd like to say, send it over to the chat. First come, first serve. Super chat gets you bumped up to the top. You can check out our Patreon, YouTube memberships for some perks on how to get chat priorities. So check those out as well.
Yeah, Cyril, man. I mean, yeah, like I said, all the tension and how he just like goes up to her and like chokes her and like, and you just see like the twisted, messed up psychology, the psyches of each other, and just the structure that they grew up in, and the differences and the similarities, and what's been shared by their position, all that, you're like, "Oh my god." It just wasn't something I expected Cyril. Like, he's very much coded as, like, nerdy, stuck up,
Mhm.
like, kind of just like, he's just a little freak, right? Like, that's how you look at it, and that's how everyone treats him, even in Morlana 1, right? Like, that he's too much, he gets custom piping on his uniform and fit, and it's like, everyone's like, "Dude, come on, like, really? Like, stop pretending, stop doing all this." And for him, it is an ideal at that point, but then when you come here and after a transformation that's obviously occurred because of Cassian, and then his free fall, and then he gets saved unexpectedly by latching onto Dedra, and then just having that little bit of luck to be in the right place at the right time to, like, trauma bond each other on Ferrix to and then seeing how that's played out with his familial relationships, his career, and then everything with Gorman, you're like, "Wow," like, he grew, he really did grow. You really do feel like, "Man, this is like an accomplished dude." Like, when he starts off this episode, he walks up to the guy and he's like, "I need to see her," and they're like, "Oh, no, like, protocol," and he's like, "Don't, like, talk to me like that." Like that he has attitude and gravitas. Finally, as a character, he has gravitas. This is not the same guy who, what Mosk, he's like, "Okay, sir, go ahead, tell your speech," and he's like, no, like, this is a guy who he's
Mhm.
he's fully
Good
become
callback.
himself in a really messed up way, and then but you feel so much sympathy because, the way it's telegraphed, he's a pawn. Everything's gonna fall apart. He's a pawn of Deader, who's a pawn of Krennic, who's a pawn of the energy department, which is the emperor, right? Like, there's so many levels to this, right? Like, and the fact that you can't do anything there, and you can almost understand what Dedra can't do there, but then you're like, but she could have not put Cyril into this position where he grew as a person, and yet
Mhm.
it's all a false like feeling, right? It's like, what? And it's like, yeah, it's an insane thing. And then for him to walk into the crowd and then kinda realized, like, "Oh, I shouldn't be here," but then it's like, "Oh, okay, I'm stunned," and all that, like and her, like, kinda, like, breaking down, like, "Oh my god, he's out there. Why did we, like, why did this happen? Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god." And then for him to lock eyes with Cassian, and you're like, "Oh, and it's feral, it's primal." The guy I did
Mhm.
not expect him to, like, go toe to toe, 'cause, I mean, Cassian's won everything, and he's gonna win, like, but
Yeah.
you think maybe he gets a lucky shot off or he like, as he's about to be killed, Wilmot catches up and shoots him or something, right? You don't really expect it to be, like, kind of the leader of the Gorman resistance, the Gorman
Yeah.
front, right? After he's realized it's a trap before everyone else. You're like, "Oh, okay, sure." But then you can also kinda see that connection there with, you know, the knowledge, the wealth, and experiential familiarity that he projected as a character by kinda assimilating with them and kinda egging them on in the first place. You're like, "Wow, this is the first guy who probably truly believed in you," and once you earned his trust, like, that changed it for everybody else. Everything else is an infatuation for maybe with the daughter and a couple others, these young, hot-blooded French/German kinda coded Gormans, but yeah, no, for the guy who finally gave you like, "Hey, no, you can be an ISB with your girlfriend, maybe to be wife, and you can infiltrate the Gormans." Like, you are that guy, so you're like and for that to have all come crashing down to be killed by that guy, and then to basically be killed 20 seconds before when Cassian's like after he's been beat over by a table, he's been kicked and then like everything. It's a brutal fight. It is like a
Mhm.
genuinely well choreographed fight. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, Cyril is cooking out here. And then for Cassian to be like, who are you even? And it just breaks him, right? You would think after everything, twisted as it might have been, that's built him up, yeah, sure, some falsitudes are being revealed, and you're like, "Yeah, okay, Cyril's gonna be unstable," that but to shatter him like that, the original drug of choice, his obsession with Cassian versus Dedra, and seeing how it just shattered him, that he couldn't handle it, my god. And then I think it was also a little nice touch to have the, the Gorman guy who killed Cinta by accident, um, when he, like, runs in and with the
Yeah.
little trucker thing and defeats K2 and breaks him down. And, like, Cassian's like, "Oh, I know you, man." It's like, yeah, and it speaks so much to that character too, honestly, because Cassian doesn't think about Morlana 1. He'll always think about Ferrix because that's his home, but not in the memories of it, like, just continuing to carry Ferrix with him. That's how him and Wilmot always greet each other and stuff like that, right? So, for this to be, like, another like, he progressed to the Gormans, in the last arc, like, this is another thing, another mission that he succeeded at. So, it's only the stuff that's closer to where he is presently, for a character who's very much living to take the next steps into the future constantly, after starting his story in the original season with, like, trying to go back to finding out his sister, when he finally was just thrown into a life where he just has to live and build and do and exist and choose to do it his way, and then to be like, "Hey, I know you," and then to see what he has for Cyril is like, that is ancient history to me. It's, like, something that I think people need to like, almost hear about, like, their grief and traumas in their life that, like, the people who hurt you don't remember you in so many ways too, and it's just to see that with Cyril, how he built, at the end of the day, so much of his identity. You think it's so well-rounded, but it's still on that little pin needle of, like, this is the guy who ruined my life and who I was, my innocence, and for it to just be shattered by, like, genuinely being like, "I don't know who you are." Fantastic writing, fantastic execution, and of all things, fantastic choreo.
Absolutely. It was a fantastic fight, and I just thought everything was so good. So really loved that. I just thought these 3 episodes, especially compared to anything else in season 2, these are so much better than the first 2 arcs, but they just flow so well together. Each one feels like a great piece, and every part of it is just at peak Andor for me. So I really love these. Did you guys love these as much as us? Let us know in the comments. Are these some of your favorite episodes? Let us know down in the chat. 2 more things I wanted to bring up real quick before we pass to some of the questions here, and then we'll get into because I do want to talk about the K2 retcon a little bit at the end, but we'll get to some of your guys' questions and comments in the chat here first. But 2 things I did want to bring up. I wanted to also give a shout out to Benjamin Bratt as Bail Organa. It wasn't that I was unconvinced last week. We didn't have very much of him, so I very much so just kind of left it as we'll see this week. But I think the physicality was the thing I was lacking. And I don't know if it was just the staging this week, but he was staged in so many more dominant positions. There were a lot more wide shots that just showed the height difference between him and Mon. It just seemed much more physically like Jimmy Smits. They could have given him a little bit more padding, maybe, made him have the weight that Jimmy Smith has, physically in this top part of the timeline. We just saw him in Obi-Wan, the way he looked there and versus also the way he looks in Rogue One. Jimmy Smits is a little heavier. So I would have loved to see like physically they just made him look more like that. Again, I'm never one for like changing faces. If you're going to recast somebody and you like make it a point to recast, then don't do the CGI face and don't do prosthetics or anything like that. I think that would be ridiculous. It would just be very weird. But if you're going to go with, some unknown actor and do a CGI face, then you do CGI face. But I thought Brat did a great job here with what he was given. The voice, a lot of that, I thought all worked. The physicality, the portrayal, I thought all of it was really, really good. These sequences were really good. Are they like completely necessary for needing to recast him? Probably not, but they are better than at least having something that's just like him standing around a table and they could have CGI green screened in Jimmy Smits later. So I'm glad they gave him what they could give him. And I thought the wrinkle too around the ISB kind of being on the fringes of Yavin and kind of like starting to infiltrate that group, Bale's group, like he's the one that's compromised right now, and Luthen's the only one that's still protected because he keeps such a tight ship on his web. I thought that was all really, really good. So I want to give a shout out to him there. And I also wanted to talk about force healing because this was a much better version of force healing, in my opinion, than the Rise of Skywalker or Mandalorian. I've never been somebody who just loves like the idea that like instantly you can be force healed. I kind of like the idea, even though video games are kind of the thing that created force healing, it's something that like takes time. Even in the game, you like press a button, you kind of have to meditate there for a few seconds. Like it takes a little bit of time, and you can't like it doesn't heal all status effects and stuff like that. There's so consequences, right? I kind of like this, even though this wasn't like a Jedi, this wasn't Rey, this wasn't Grogu. It's not somebody who's like extremely force sensitive. I kind of like the idea to me of kind of a spiritual healing being a part of it, like kind of force awakening your body's ability to start fighting whatever is ailing it, and also spiritually kind of calm you down. It helped Cassian kind of be able to talk about his demons and get that type of stuff out there. So I thought it worked kind of well. I was a little nervous when they started with like the force healer. I was like, oh no, here we go. Some random person that we've never heard before can like heal wounds. But I thought it was a restrained, pretty good use of force healing. So and it wasn't like Cassian wasn't instantly better. He just was
No,
soothed.
yeah.
It was like putting some taking some Advil. Yeah, he was just kind of like he kind of slowly healed. But yeah, I wanted to give a point to that because I felt like that was going to be contentious, and I don't know what you guys think about that in the chat, but it was a moment that I thought passed and was used more so just to introduce somebody who could kind of vaguely see the future and importance of Cassian and indicate that to Bix so that she can make her ultimate decision. But let's move on to the chat here. And again, guys, we're gonna go for as long as you guys keep sending in chats. So the chats have been inconsistent the last few weeks. We have a few more talking points, but that's mostly our conversation about Andor season 2, episodes 7 through 9. So we're gonna continue with your guys' chats in the chat room. It is first come, first serve. Send in a super chat. It helps out the channel so much. Can't even reiterate enough how much that helps out the channel, and it bumps you up to the top. So we'll guarantee to answer your chat tonight. And also check out our Patreon YouTube membership programs. There are certain tiers that get you priority chat access. If you subscribe to those programs, you get a bunch of extra stuff, including some other live stream perks. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, definitely check out our programs there. All right, let's start with Badasai the Manslayer says, it was a really powerful experience. My question is, how does this work with the canon of Rebels? In there, she already has short hair, white suit. I think Rebels is days later after the finale of the Andor arc, and she has given more public transmissions against the Emperor because in Imperial HoloNet they show a discourse of hers, and we know that the Empire shot down this one on the Senate. So yes, to answer your question, they talk about that. They bring it up in this episode that Cassian says he's going to take him on, and they say no, we have a freighter coming who's going to pick her up. They want her to do a transmission and make a speech. So that's going to lead into Rebels. I guess we can assume that at some point between this and then she cuts her hair. They give her a nice iconic Mon Mothma white tunic, and she gets up there and becomes the Mon Mothma you see in Return of the Jedi and in Rogue One. So I'm guessing that's what happens sometime in the day or so that follows. But yes, Rebels does take place, I would assume, about moments or days, a day at most after the end of this arc. I was kind of expecting because they said at the end, right before he sees K2, they're like, "We have a freighter coming in." I was hoping it was the Ghost, and we just got to see the Ghost land. We got to see Mon Mothma walk out. Like I just would have loved to see that, but Andor's not that type of show. Didn't really expect it, but yeah, the freighter that they indicate coming to pick her up, that should be the Ghost.
Yeah, yeah, and I I don't know if it's even the ghost, actually. We know that the ghost connects to another ship, and then
Right.
we haven't seen even that portion. So I do think there is some weight to what you're saying here, Bradis. I do think, like, yeah, we haven't really seen the Rebels version of, like, a speech being made by her. So maybe as she continues, like, in the next few days to, like, keep moving and then does connect with the Ghost Crew, maybe she slowly starts, like, taking apart the senatorial look and dons the rebel leader's regal look, right? I don't think the hair is that much of a problem. I know Genevieve definitely has more hair than she does when she's got her Rogue One hair going there, but not by much, honestly. I think that's just she has a very nice stylistic product that really kinda brings out her shorter hair and, like, accentuates it. But once you kinda get rid of hair product, you'd be surprised how many people just don't have gray hair, right? Like, I think it's just one of those things where you're like, "Oh, it's a little dry, we've just got the refreshers on the ship. We don't really have your luxurious Chandrillan hotel-esque life situation," right? So, yeah, no, I I wasn't too shocked by having her kinda stay the same and just kind of be wearing some of Cassian's different versions of him, the rebellion gear that he carries on him and all that, so I thought that was more of, like, her finally, "This is what it means, this is how it feels," and then eventually when we do see her, it's like the weight of seeing this all happen to her and then who she's with, and then when she starts to build herself out of, like, a little bit the shock that she's also in, right? Then you'll see that more regal, dignified, like, transformational, but still very much pure Mon Mothma that we, you know, and still get in Rebels, right? Where she's a little bit more assured about there's nothing left to go to, right? So Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think you're actually probably closer to being right than what even this show implies, that there's more in between this and Rebels, even if it's only maybe like a day's worth of like travel and jumping around and getting closer to what we see in that Rebel scene. Um, but yeah, I know. I mean, I thought it was well handled. Like Liam said, I wish we could have seen her board the ship and then have them start to change or something. Um, I think there's a very interesting point to not trying to diminish the fashion and the power that she has as a senator versus a rebellion leader on the run, number one target of the empire. Transitioning it is almost more of a mental game for her. I don't think she, like her fashion, like, falls off because she's now kinda more austere with the rebellion. It's an intentionality. I think she needs to convey that, so I'm kinda glad that they didn't show her, like, transform that, like, it should be almost like a choice that it's not lessened by everything that just happened to her. That might be what her mind's going through, but what she projects should always be that image of, like, "I'm not just Mon Mothma, the senator for Chandrila, I am the public face of the rebellion right now."
Madasai says, I also wanted the Emperor on the show, but it has been very powerful to hear about him and not seeing him very much like A New Hope, where you can feel his presence through other characters like Tarkin and the other high ranking officers, etc. Yeah, I completely agree. I really wanted to see Palpatine. I said last week, I think it was either in predictions or our stream last week, that I felt like we were now officially not going to see him because they introduced this Oath Keeper character who now runs the Senate even over Mas Amedda or somebody like that. So like the Oath Keeper's below Mas Amedda, then Mas Amedda's below Palpatine. We were probably never going to see him. I think at best we can maybe, if this show was taking place without the time jumps, you could maybe expect like a response, because the Senate thing, it got out there even if they cut the feed right at the end. So maybe there's a response by Palpatine, denying the claims of Mon Mothma, something like that. But we're probably not going to see that because the show's going to jump a year or more in time. And we kind of expect, like I said last week as well, like this time jump between this week and next week is probably going to be the biggest, unless they do big time jumps between each of the 3 episodes next week, because they say that the final episode is going to end with Cassian, like in the moment you see him for the first time in Rogue One, which is obviously like 0.0000001 BBY. So it's like right next to the events of A New Hope. And this takes place in 2 BBY. So in order to move us like basically almost 2 years, it has to be in like the fringes of 1 BBY and 0 BBY. So there's some room to play there next week. They could go, since they've wrapped up a lot of the arcs, they could go with a bunch of different directions. They could do each episode kind of progressing in time a little bit, each episode being about a different character, wrapping up each character's journey, and the final one being about Cassian. Not sure what they'll do yet. I'll have to keep thinking about that for our predictions, but yeah, I think our time of seeing Palpatine is probably over, but I really did want to see him. I was hoping we'd get some little glimpse of him at some point.
Yeah, yeah, it's just not gonna happen, but yeah, I you do feel the weight. I do like the weight that is in almost every episode of this arc. Like Dedra also has the weight of, hey, okay, this is what Krennic is doing. This is what the Emperor said, right? It's like you feel these just the names land, and that I mean, at the end of the day, as much as Star Wars has been almost a little bit more democratized with like stuff like Andor and all these animated shows that kind of spread out the narrative from just Luke, Han, and Leia, and them being the faces and everything in the rebellion. It's still big names are big names, right? They are still what shaped and made the foundation of Star Wars. So you can kind of work with that, and I think this is a great case of like using him in a way that and A New Hope can't even, because the Emperor is not really a character in that film. He might have been dropped here and there, but you don't really feel the like, oh, like the Emperor weight to it, right? Like, but you feel it absolutely through the prequels after seeing Revenge of the Sith. So Dark Times, yeah, you'll feel that. You'll feel that during episode 5 and 6 when you finally get to see Ian and you get to see him fully in the flesh by episode 6. Like you feel all of that because it's in a very inhabiting performance. But because we know that and it happened in our real world so many years ago, just the name alone just does enough for us. So I'm happy with it. I would have liked a Masamita, honestly, but I can live with this. I think the type of guy he is by the time of the Aftermath books, he's so haughty in general that, like, there was no way that he was gonna be running the Senate daily or whenever they had their sessions and be like, "Oh, yeah, this is what I get to do. I'm, like, the chancellor." No, he's probably thinking he's even too good for that now.
I I think by not showing him, it did make, to reiterate what you're kinda saying, Badasai, it made that name drop she gives in her speech even so much more powerful because it's just the full declaration of using invoking his full name, or at least without the she part, but invoking the name Palpatine. You don't really hear anybody ever say that in original trilogy timeline or really anything. It's always the Emperor. And so Palpatine being used, that was powerful. But yeah, I wish we got to see him, but it's all right. I think the show is just as good without seeing him as it would have been if we saw him. Batasai says, "What do you think we will see in the next and final arc? It has to be about the construction of the alliance, but then again, how would that work with what we have seen in Rebels?" She gives another speech at the end, uniting the rebel cells so connect properly. The first arc must have her with short hair and with the alliance assembled already. So in regards to that, I don't think we're going to see any type of like construction of the alliance. I mean, the fact that we started on Yavin in this arc makes me think that that kind of plot line, that idea is just gone. Uh, I, Going back to that, I was a little jarred at the beginning of this arc starting on Yavin. I was like, okay, that was something I really wanted to see, especially with Yavin being in the first episode of season two, and it being kind of this random place that Cassian ends up on, and he gets involved in this little skirmish. I was kind of hoping for some more significance with Cassian and like the discovery of Yavin or all of that, setting up the base on Yavin. But we never get to that. So I don't think we're getting any like rebel construction. What I think Cassian's role will be it'll be twofold. One, it'll be the early stages of figuring out that the Death Star is a thing, right? I think the next arc is fully about the Death Star, and it's about the warning and the nervousness around whatever the Empire is working on, the discovery of the secret project that the Energy Division is working on that they talk about a bunch in higher ranking ISB conversations in the show, but we have yet to see crossover into the Rebel lines. I think something Luthen does, something he involves Cassian in, or something he involves one of his operatives in, gets word to the rebels that hey, there's this thing that might be out there, and the rumors is it's a super weapon. You guys got to figure out what it is because Cassian doesn't know what it is when at the beginning of Rogue One, his informant tells him it's a planet killer, and that sets off the chain of events. But they have this informant for a reason. So I think it's going to be about the Death Star. I think with that, you're going to form a little bit more of the relationship between Cassian and K2. You're going to see that relationship starting to bud. You're going to see it in full force. Now Cassian's going to be looking for a new partner now that Bix left. So I think he's going to be, building that connection and a little bit reluctant and hesitant at first, but obviously they'll come together and be a dynamic duo as we see in Rogue One. I think from the Luthen perspective, we'll see him give it everything to get this kind of information in this last push for the rebellion. I think he's going to die. They've alluded to it too much in the show, and I feel like he's too much of a wild card to not kill him. What will happen to Clea? I think it would be kind of perfect for the show if both of them go down together, but we'll see if she survives or not. I'll have a lot more for you once we think about it for a little while and maybe rewatch some of the episodes on predictions. But I think that's the kind of general direction they're going. I expect more Krennic in this arc. I expect more Rogue Oneness. I've kind of said that the entire time for this show, especially when we started to see the trajectory of what they were outlining after the first arc and especially after the second arc. Kind of expected arc 4 to be the full Rogue One arc. I think it's going to be the kind of establishment of Jeddah and the fact that, we're drilling for Calcite on Gorman, and that's the reason this problem was started. Well, now they need to drill for Kyber on Jeddah, or they're probably already drilling for Kyber on Jeddah, but they're going to make it, fast and furious, and maybe that brings Saw to Jeddah as his, new location. Will we see Saw, have his leg messed up? Will we see him in the full Saw, crazy Saw that we see in Rogue One? They started him down that path in the second arc, but then he didn't show up at all in this arc. So I expect a little bit reconnection with Saw and the Partisans. I expect more Krennic. I expect more Death Star. If we get Galen Urso, which I would really like, it's here. and I think Riz Ahmed's Bodhi Rook is a possibility here. If they really want to connect it right to Rogue One, I could see that being a plot line of one of the episodes here. But I think this is a full Rogue One episode, and I think the Death Star is the centerpiece of whatever we see next arc.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of the same feelings. I do think there's a possibility of each episode having kind of a jump in between compared to how it's kind of been like, here's everything that happens in a matter of 2, 3 days, right?
Yeah,
I think that's a very high probability just because we know the chapter where we're gonna land, exactly how we're gonna land and everything, right? So yeah, it's a little telegraphed, but I'd rather it be telegraphed and capture as much of the story possible left in Cassian's life before Rogue One. So, yeah, I guess we won't really get to see the Yavin base be built out. I do still think it's quite interesting that, yeah, there's like almost like a whole village to it outside. It's not just like this is a base. It's like this is where people are kind of like settling in with their families and like it's not just like the people like right. I guess it's still early. It's not really fully militarized. So I think we'll start seeing a little bit more of that. I think it's very telling how they use Draven in this arc because he's not all, like, encompassing yet. He's not like,
yeah,
he's still a hero. He dies in the comics. It's super satisfying because it's so dickish of him still, but it's like, that's what you love about the guy, right? He's still such a hard head and, like, he'll do what needs to be done, but if you look at their relationship here, like, Cassian has the upper hand the whole time. He's like, no, like, I'll do it when I have to. Like, I it's like, "Oh, you can't do you're gonna just when you're on the verge of this," and it's like, they won't like this. Like, "Okay, I'm still going," right? That's how Cassian kinda acts. But then in Rogue One, it's like, "These are your mission, these are the parameters. You got any feelings about it? Too bad," right? It's kinda like that. So I thought it was very interesting to see, like, how he's still a little, like, unstructured with Cassian. Cassian may have some real role in that Yavin military, but it's not official until kind of the end of the episode, and then his attitude kinda gets locked in with Bix leaving. So I think what you'll see is a lot of window dressing. You'll start seeing a lot more squads. You might see like talks about a character that might show up and be like talking about like, oh yeah, that's what was happening with the Yavin group. Oh, that's what's happening with the Adelon group and stuff like that. You might see the Ghost Land. I think you'll see those things, but you'll probably just see like a lot of Blue Squad, Gold Squad, and I think honestly a lot of Blue Squad Squadron next arc, just because red and yellow get enough of the Death Star and sitting around and stuff. It's not a lot, but it's like this is it. They've survived some crazy things, but this is it. Blue is like in almost so many ways in Rogue One is coded as like they are the ultimates. They are the best of the best and all that. And red and gold, they're like, yeah, they're pretty good. Like, yeah, they're a good solid team. So I'd love to see the general there, and I love to see everyone kind of show up and how they structure themselves around Cassie and how that changes how he flies, U-wing and everything. Uh, how Mel Sheet kind of plays it. Like I think it's gonna be all his interactions with the different parts and branches of this actively organizing military that's gonna make it be like, "Oh, I see how it's changed," right? And if we like lose that village, or if more and more people become a little bit more like this looks more military coded, maybe that's all you really need. But yeah, I do agree. It was a little interesting to have it already be so well established, but also open to stuff that you could have force healers and stuff like that happen.
hmm
And again, I'm not I like how Yavin is being used again as a place for a lot of force-based stories because the EU definitely doubles down on that, both pre-Skywalker Saga and post-Skywalker Saga. It's a little surprising to me that one of the most interesting force healing stories happened here, and in a way that was more about, like it kinda almost not changed how we look at the force, but, like, opened up the possibility that, like, you don't have to be able to use the force to almost attune someone else or enhance themselves, enhance yourselves, right? Like, it can just be that's how the force is. It interacts, the midichlorians, everyone's got it. It's just your reactivity, your possession of it, right? So, I thought it was a sidebar there, but very fascinating, and I don't know if that's a culture that continues by the time we get to where we are in 0 BBY, where everything is just do this, do that. We have to make some very dark, difficult choices. Draven's our guy, and he's gonna have his top guy in Cassian, right? Like, we're not there yet, despite having a lot of almost familiar feeling things there. So, I think that's how you'll see that. I agree with a lot of what Liam was saying. We need to see how Saab kinda plays in. I think Bodhi Rook and Mads Mikkelsen as Galen is that's gonna happen for sure, in that final episode. At least, like, a scene or 2 of them. Maybe not the whole, like, transformation of Bodhi to, like, go out there and stuff. Um, yeah, we still need to see what the hell is gonna happen to Saw to get him in that condition. And I know, like, it's almost nice to have the character be like, "Oh, what if, what happened?" Right? But then this show has literally taken his breathing mask from Rogue One and been like, "Oh, it's not oxygen, guys." Like, he's just really off of Rydell, just
Yeah.
literally gas fumes, where you're like, "Oh, okay." Like, that changes everything about it, and also makes a lot more sense for how he acts in Rogue One now. So, what about his legs? What about his body? Especially now we know what his obsession is with the kyber crystals and everything in the Death Star. Are we gonna see that discovery? Are we gonna see him after the discovery and how he starts splitting off and his body gets destroyed, what changes him fundamentally? I don't know. I think that's kind of the angle that to choose from. Is it more important to have him almost be almost like too sober and too calm about once he sees his worst fears realized with the Death Star? Or is it just he goes crashes out, has a terrible mission go wrong, and then the partisans have reached such an extreme point that Mon Mothma and Bail are like, "No more. We can't be doing this with this guy anymore." So, very
Yeah.
interesting presence for him to really approach that. And then Dedra, I mean, I can see some stuff with Krennic, but I think it's gonna be some very messed up personal stuff. I know I think there's a good chance she'll be playing the almost goofishly, cartoony villain out here. But I could also see, like, that just be a front, and then the moments that she's alone, Partagas isn't talking to her and all that, she's just, like, doing all that physical acting you see of her, like, falling apart. Because that was yeah, that's shock, that's pain, that's loss, that's all those things, but, uh, I think she's got a lot more, and I'd like to in some ways, see a lot more of that and see how that can almost be self-sabotaging to the ISB, to Krennic in some ways. Maybe her role and her crash out, from the Gorman and the fallout of losing Cyril and how that reflects on, everything that we know about her relationship with Krennic alerts Tarkin to be like, "Really, Krennic? You approved of all this? How you would handle it?" And especially with Catalyst already so military oriented around the Death Star plans and all that. I'd love just another, leaf in the cap of, Tarkin to be like, "Uh-huh, alright, I'll just pop in here, give another reason why I think Krennic, you're just a bunch of a loser, and I'm gonna take over your life's work because I can criticize you for this." I think I can definitely see something like that for her. Um, yeah, I don't know if we'll see Bale, honestly. I think we might just see him, like, when he first is leaving from, like, a retreat to Alderaan and then never returns to Coruscant or something. But I don't think he even really need it, the way he's kinda positioned himself here, like, "I'm gonna be here for a year." He quite literally says that, "I'll join you in a year on Yavin." That's fine by me. But yeah, I think those are kind of the ways we go, and then Cassian, just fit him anywhere you can. At this point, any way you can with K2 and that relationship, the loss of Bix, and what that means for him, what that drives for him. And if Bix is gonna be gone and he's almost forced to see a little bit more into his own beliefs about superstition and the Force and all that, and how that carries him and makes him more fervent, I think that'd also be a great storyline to continue, even if we don't see Bix ever again in the show.
I think we'll see Bale for sure, just because of what Tony Gilroy has been saying about recasting. I think this will be a little bigger Bale arc. Like I think he'll be a little bit more involved, maybe in the politics. But I really want to see why the bridge is so burned between Saw and the rebels. I predicted last week that maybe if we had this kind of epilogue to the Gorman massacre, I didn't expect it to be an entirely Mon Mothma episode, although I'm very satisfied with what we got. But I kind of predicted that maybe the Gorman Massacre and Mon Mothma stand, the creation of the Rebel Alliance would fuel someone like Saw to commit acts of terror in the name of the Rebel Alliance, just to have that kind of group as the target for the Empire's ire instead of himself and his partisans. So I'd love to see if that still happens. Like he could have over the next year, when we have the 1 year later time jump, he could have just been wreaking havoc across the galaxy, and the Rebel Alliance is like, all right, we got to stop this guy. He's too crazy. Let's send Will and let's send Cassian to go meet with him. I think that could be where they go. We'll send Cassian, K2, and Will, and we can see how that arc goes. I would like to see that. I just really want to see more Saw. Not that Saw's ever been a big part of the show, but I think they made him a big enough part of the show in that second arc, with him basically being there for all the episodes of it, to where like he's now kind of a part of this. Like you can't just like leave him out completely in this final arc, especially with his ties to Rogue One. I really want to see a little bit more build for him after season one, because in season one he's in like one scene. So it was more of a cameo. Now he's more of a character, and so I
Yeah,
expect a
yeah.
little more from him. And then with Dedra as well, I think she's going to completely devote herself to finding Luthen. I think finding Axis, that mission was always her thing. That's what she wanted to do. She's going to try to find him. I think contribute to his death, but I think she's going to die as well. I think it's going to be a tragic, sad, bittersweet, but like you're kind of hoping she dies because of some of the things she does, but knowing her life and how rough it's been, I think it's gonna be a bittersweet death for her as well. But then as for the Mon Mothma thing, you also mentioned Batasai. Again, the rebel stuff all happens between this last episode and the next arc. So I don't think they're going to show any of that. I don't really think, unless it's some type of like somebody saved a hologram of Mon Mothma's speech to inspire them, and they look at it every once in a while. Unless it's something like that, I don't really see them going to any of those rebels scenes. So I don't think we'll see any of that, like construction of the Rebel Alliance, the birth of the Rebel Alliance, the joining of the cells. I don't think we'll see any of that stuff that you see in Rebels. I think they'll save that for Rebels. Okay, so we got John. Is it Cousins or Cousins? Says Brat did good, but man, I wish Jimmy Smits would have been there for this. Yeah, I mean, again, I wish he was as well. It's a bummer that he's not. It's still definitely hard to see Benjamin Bratt completely as Bail Organa, but I thought he did a great job for what he was given, and he sold the scenes he needed to. So I was impressed, thoroughly impressed with his performance here. Still no substitute for Jimmy, but I still thought he was pretty good.
Yeah, again, I'm I hate to say it, but I'm gonna definitely when I see, like, whatever channel comes out with it, an edit of all the scenes with deepfake Jimmy Smits, I am gonna see it just for the satisfaction in my mind of, like, what could have been, but fantastic performance by Benjamin Bratt. Really hope the cues that I saw and the physicality and all that actually really line up well with the deepfake, and you feel like, "Oh, Jimmy Smits would have done that," right? I hope that comes off. But, we'll see. At the end of the day, it was just a great performance. I wouldn't have minded it if this was, like, a younger Bale, like, even before Attack of the Clones, or if he was, you know, like, in a very different setting where he's not wearing his typical clothing, and it just makes more sense to kinda go almost full free range with the character. But it's the fact that it's so close to Rogue One and all that, you're like, that's a tough one." And the fact that this is the first time that Jimmy Smits would have been able to, like, just straight up act and do some great political discussions and legwork and rebellious activities, and how well it reads with that idealism that he carries in his body and his face, that you can like, read off the pages of Mask of Fear and all that. I don't see that with this Brett. I think I need to rewatch it a little bit to maybe see a little bit more of, like, that humanity shine through. But that's the one thing that I think Benjamin, no matter what he was gonna do, would just never match Jimmy on, and if he did, then I would have honestly 0 complaints about this performance.
John Cousins says this was amazing. I need more understanding of what's going on with K2. Well, I mean, I guess I'm not sure exactly what you need more clarification on, but I guess he's been reprogrammed and he's been rebuilt, and I guess now he's the K2 we know. I'm interested to see if they, bring in any of the quirks of like him readjusting to this new personality matrix and this new hard reset they've given him. But and he does spark a lot. They didn't do a great job of putting him back together. I guess he does spark a lot and have a kind of a hard time getting going. But he is a little defective when we meet him in Rogue One. He's definitely marches to the beat of his own drum. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they play with some of that we see in that end. But yeah, yes, he's completely back to Alan Tudyk K2SO.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wish we could have had, like, B2 EMO kind of still play a role in this, like, his personality matrix be, like, the underlying code, what makes K2 relatively docile, right? And gives him that very quirky personality where, like, he hates everybody, kinda like a cat, but then he loves Jenner, so and, like, he's just astounded by, like, the audacity sometimes, right? I don't know how much a B2 has that, and I think the fact that he just was, like, kinda left behind in the first arc, and we never heard any mention of him, just kinda killed any chance of that. But kinda seeing how, like, the Bones Mr. Bones, like, Matrix was used in, like, the Poe Dameron comics and all that, how it continued beyond, what we see in the Aftermath trilogy. I was kinda hoping for something like that here, but it's okay. I'm just very curious now what's gonna make this K2, like, not just like, "Oh, he's like, we've done the engineering marvel of controlling his, like, mood and regulating his behavior. It's like, "Okay, great. What does that mean when Cassie's interacting with that? What can you do to fine tune it and train it to the Alan Tudyk version," right? So, I would think it'd be a little easier by having B2 kinda blended in there, have the whole, like, Millennium Falcon with 3 different computer brains that just all hate each other and go crazy, and such a very interesting personality put together. I was hoping something like that with K2, but maybe that's a little hard to show visually for a lot of people, so and with no B2 around, it was kinda out of the picture.
John says K2 will be nice to see, and Luthen's death will be interesting. Pretty sure they'll kill him, but good to see Bix might live. Yeah, I think Luthen's gonna die for sure. I don't think he can coexist with this version of the Rebel Alliance, even if he is getting a little bit more used to the fact that other rebels are coming out. Like I think he liked being the only one for a while and being the one who was leading the charge. Now that there's a big group of people, he's having a hard time conforming to that. I would like to see him have some type of meeting or something directly with the upper brass of the rebels. Like I think that would be a great scene. Bale, Mon, all of them talking to Luthen about his methods. I think that would be really interesting. A great thing to be a fly on the wall for. But I expect him to die. He's not going to be captured, so he'll take himself out if he has to. But he's going to go out in some capacity. I think for sure.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see, like, his legacy be almost reflected as he's dying in real time in the episode, right, by all these other rebel leaders like Bill and Mon, and I'd love to see Garm, just throw in, like,
Mhm.
that EU love and just have a Corellian's perspective on Luthen, and, just because 'cause he's got such a aggressive streak to him, gruffness to him that I think Corellians can appreciate, but also dissect. Um, yeah, but it probably won't happen. Again, it's interesting, we talked so much leading into the season that Gilroy is so good at, like, making things canon and connecting and blending and respecting it. Here, he just straight up changed K2's origin, and you're like, "Okay, fine." But I'd love to see something like that where he can bring a little bit more of the threads of the rebellion that the EU explored, that other canon has explored, but, we don't need to see too much of, like if we see, like, the Adelan, rebels, maybe we don't see the Ghost Crew, we see their ship, but maybe we see Chopper and, like a side character from the show, like an Erskine, right? Almost like you're like, "Oh, yeah, that's that guy who, like, showed up in 3, 4 episodes." I just kinda wanna see stuff like that happen, so,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it'd be great, but Luthen's done. He is, it's just is it gonna be him and Edward done at the same time at each other's hand, or how does Clea factor into it, especially because she's become so much more independent in a lot of ways this season, but still very much still 1-2 punch with Luthen. It's gonna be a weird one to see his death because, he has been, like, the philosophical, like, foundation of every character that we've really seen. Even people who, like, felt like they were insulated in some ways, like Mon Mothma, find out, like, "Oh, even your circle has been, like, selected by this guy." And how do you trust him? Do you hate him for it? Did it work? Is it results over morals? Like, those are questions they're gonna carry on forever. But if they wanna really reflect on that, they almost have to kill him a little earlier in, like, episode 8 or 9 and then have everything as the Rogue One is right about to strike, like, right about to see the literal things happen. You almost have, like, Cassian, like, not flashback, but maybe have, like, moments of, like, considering just how far he's come because of this guy and what that's really meant, like, and what he's lost, what he's gained. So,
Mhm.
I'd love to see every character deal with losing Luthen and what that means, but will it happen, in a satisfying way for an aftermath to be, like, part of that story without killing narrative drive? I don't know. That's a really tough one for me to see, but it'll be fun. I think Dedra will be great. I don't think she sees a light. I think she just goes crazy, honestly, and you have to lock her up in a cell, and that gives Tarkin even more reason to be like, "Ha, Krennic, you and your projects, like, can't do anything right." But, yeah, it'll be fascinating to see the 2 of them. more than likely, they'll be the cause of each other in some way, direct or indirectly, but still, I would love to see both of them have unexpected endings and how that reflects on the people who've been around them, or in Dedra's case, who's there's nobody left but her, and now she's gone too, so that'll be pretty fascinating.
Arnik Zool says, absolutely agree on force healing. It's so typical for this show to grab things of the lore and elevate it. Yeah, I would say elevate it and just ground it.
Yeah.
This show does a good job of taking things that feel fantastical and are purposely fantastical for the mainline Star Wars movies. And again, as somebody who prefers the fantastical side of Star Wars, who loves the mythological side of Star Wars, who loves the Force and all that type of stuff, the fact that I'm so on board with just the way that you can see things from the common person's perspective in the way Gilroy writes and the way Gilroy tells his stories, it's really impressive the way he's able to take these things and just make them feel like they're like everyday conversations. Like people, yeah, everybody knows about the Force, of course. Well, there's Force healers out there, sure. Things like that. Like I think he does a great job of just making it commonplace and making it work for the lore and just creating that lived in vibe. And this was again another great use of that. So I really did appreciate that by the end of it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, it's still a little weird to me that Yavin is this fully fleshed out to have like a village instead of just like a canteen or something, right? Like it's you could walk through there, everyone's kind of got individual huts and stuff. You're like,
Yeah,
oh, that's a little bit more than I expected. I'll say that, but it worked because if that's gonna be there, you're gonna have these normal people that have these little pieces of their lives and of the history of Star Wars that has shaped their planets, shaped their experiences, and then they all have that obligation, that drive to fight for freedom, for independence from the empire, to change things back to how they were in some way. So, yeah, I thought seeing the force healing be used, but not like in the way like you said. Like I think it still makes sense in the Rise of Skywalker and all that, and there is still like that visual, like oh, like you sacrifice your own life essence for somebody else. We've seen Bears with her long history with force healing and everything, how like she ages in Tales of the Empire and all that, and like how much of that is like where she's been, how much has time passed, how much has she given up her lifespan. Like those questions, I still really like when you have powerful, very high midichlorian count users using that. But then when you see someone who's very clearly just kind of like a shaman who like burns sage, maybe gets one thing right here and there, for her to be attuned because of Cassidy, who's not force sensitive himself, but they all have midichlorians, they all have the Force in them in some ways. That like the commonality of the Force, like that the Force is not an exclusive club, that the Force flows through everybody. I like that because it makes so much sense for like why I look at like a Han Solo and you're like, oh, how does this guy like this redneck RV trucker out of nowhere like, just work and blend so well with everything that we see here with Leia, a princess and a senator and all this, and then this kid Luke who's got all these powers as they're activating and all that. Well, the Force flows to them in all very different ways, right? You can be a part of the Force without having a grasp of the Force, right? The Force can flow through. I mean, we've seen it in Rogue One. That it was one of the first real examples of like changing how we look at the Force because you have oh, how am I blanking on his name?
sure.
Chirrut, yeah. I was gonna say Baz, was it? No, it's not. But yeah,
Days is
Chirrut,
the other
right?
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, but you see Chirrut, like, "I am one with the Force is with me. I am one with the Force is with me." Yeah, he's on Jedha, maybe he has some sort of sensitivity or, like, traditional practices to get tune him a little closer to the world of the Force and all that, but he's, for the most part, like, an example of, like, yeah, not you're not a Jedi, you're not someone who's got this full, like, telekinesis going on and all that, and you still use the Force in very interesting and powerful ways. So seeing, like, just these little sparks and how Cassian, of all people, could make her better, and then how she can almost leave imprints about his destiny and that she's awakened and seen, and how he'll hate that, but he'll know parts of it when it all lines up. Yeah, I think he's gonna be seeing that image of himself hugging Bix. He's gonna be hearing that that little, hotel lobby guy and that little, like, rebellions are built on the bellhop. You're like, "Wow," like, all these things, and he's probably gonna hear something too, like, in the next arc that or see something or feel something that you're like, "Oh my god, that's what he does with Jin," or that's what he does in his, like, final moments on Scarif and all that, like, yeah, you're gonna see stuff like that, I think, and that's what's only gonna make it so much more devastating, that now you're gonna have this character that has always been chasing forward ever since Luthen got a hold of him, but in some ways almost knows that the end is a lot closer than he wants it to be, but he still has to go for it, right? Like, he knows he's getting close the more he senses and feels these things, and he doesn't have the Force, he just has someone who had a light spark touch on him and affect both of them, and I like how that's used. That's how a Force ability can be almost democratized in the galaxy that 10 years ago, we were talking about The Force Awakening, but here we're kinda seeing how that can probably realistically happen almost in that way, almost in A Legend of Korra when the airbenders come back. You can almost do that in whatever stories come out after Rise of Skywalker, like Starfighter or whatever else gets fleshed out in the new novel with Finn and, Janna that got announced and all that. You can start seeing smaller things like this, but happening at a higher volume, then you can use the basis of just great writing and example of how the Force can be just little tiny things like this here in Andor of all things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a good use of it, and it's Tony Gilroy's way of grounding it, and I thought it worked really, really well. Rob says, "Do you think Dedra has seen the light? Doubt it, but who knows? I doubt it as well. I think maybe she could see the error of her ways and maybe switch what she's involved with, try to run away a little bit from some of these higher responsibilities. But I do think she's going to throw herself completely in to tracking down Luthen and tracking down Axis, and for no other reason than she's going to want somebody to blame for this. She's going to want to take out her frustration on something and someone. And I think she's going to take it out on Luthen. And I think we will see that come to a head. And I'm looking forward to how that plays and how it plays in the ISB with Lonnie and with all the other characters involved in it. Looking forward to seeing where that goes. But I don't think Dedra is going to turn into a good guy by any means. Like I don't think she's the next Agent Callus. Like I think she's gonna be thoroughly bad all the way through the show.
Yeah, she's going crazy. If anything, she's gonna fall apart more in my mind before she really reckons with it. Because even like when after she got choked by Cyril, right? And this is a man so desperate for the truth and no deception from somebody that he's almost willingly put up with her being fully dominant in that relationship. She immediately is like, "We're gonna be heroes, like, we've done this," and she's almost convincing herself of, like, this insane fascist belief that's even crazier than her own, that she's working through, right? And it's like, "Oh, wow, yeah, Dedra, oh boy, yeah, I love watching you work. I support women's wrongs, but maybe this might be a little too wrong, right, to, like, destroy your relationship and your self-esteem and your mental health and everything. And knowing that even if you do turn around, it makes no difference. Someone else is gonna do it. Like it's an insane position to be in, right? But that is what it is. So yeah, seeing light after Gorman, oh, no chance.
Yeah, no way. Badasai says, "Do you think the fact that the massacre were in the hundreds diminishes some of New Hope? I mean, in A New Hope, Han realizes Alderaan was destroyed, and his reaction was very casual. And here, everybody is scandalized in a way that nobody reacts to the destruction of Alderaan. I don't think it diminishes A New Hope whatsoever. So, I mean, first of all, Han, he's worried about his life there when he comes out of hyperspace into an asteroid field after Alderaan is blown away. Yes, I think if A New Hope was made with everything else that came after it in mind, um, they probably would have had stronger reactions to the destruction of Alderaan. But it is a plot point mostly in that film. But again, we're seeing the Gorman massacre from the perspectives of the people who were there, and then also from somebody incredibly empathic like Mon Mothma, who's looking for reasons to hate the Empire, basically.
Yeah.
And so we never see the reaction of Mon Mothma on the destruction of Alderaan. I'm sure she would have a very similar reaction to how she had with the destruction or the Gorman massacre. So I don't think it diminishes A New Hope whatsoever because the characters who are involved outside of Princess Leia, who know Alderaan, who know the people there know Bail Organa, know all that, the importance of Alderaan to the rebellion. They're not shown in the film at all. Really, the best you got is General Dodona. And at that point, it had been days or a long time from since the destruction of Alderaan. They had kind of sat with it for a while, and they were about to get blown away by the Death Star. So they needed to get their act together and get ready to fight, because otherwise they were going to die. So I don't think it really has any comparison whatsoever, the two of them. But I absolutely think that there were plenty of stories we haven't seen, and some we have read, like the Leia comic and stuff like that, where Alderaan and its survivors, or Razor's Edge and Legends, Alderaan and its survivors are an important part, and the reaction to Alderaan is an important part of the lore between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. So just because we haven't seen it on film, I guess doesn't mean it doesn't have the same reaction from characters.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think you're also having to look at the situation as it's unfolding. This is a planet that's already had Tarkin land on people, and they somehow still not resisted immediately. And then once this happens, and it's manipulated and using their history against them, kind of pushing them all to kind of do this, infiltrating them, right? Yeah, it's a massacre, but it's like, okay, like, the Empire had to do this, right? These are the wrongdoers, and you see these constantly every, like, 20 minutes in this arc, you'd be seeing the reporters, and they're spewing the propaganda. They're spewing, like, "Oh, the aggressive Gorman action." You even start the Senate scene with one of the senators being like, "Oh, just the savagery that they were doing and all that," right? Like, you have to also we can't downplay that. Like, we live in a world today of so much, like, misinformation and disinformation that it's not shocking that the Empire of all in a fictional world where they control a literal galaxy, wouldn't be able to control the narrative of, like, what people are thinking and seeing, yet what you're seeing is not enough. "Oh, no, the Empire knows," right? Why would you do that to the Empire, right? Like, I think you have to take that into heavy consideration. 2, we don't really see how bad the massacre gets. Again, we don't really see the mining, we don't know that stuff yet, so yeah, maybe the scandalized reaction could have been, like, played over a little bit more. We've seen some screens or something in the Senate that would have been like, "Oh my god, like, now we really need to deal with, like, what's going on here. This is, like, an affront to being an imperial citizen," all that. But we don't, right? So we can't really make any real basis off that. It's just, another unfortunate military thing that escalated and gone crazy, but the Empire had to do the right thing, right? You're not even seeing that many stormtroopers, like, gun down and punch people or anything. They're mostly on the corners. They're letting the 5th squad or whatever kinda deal with that and their snipers and all. It's a absolutely artificial construction. There's nothing artificial about the Death Star, though. Like, when we have so many stories in EU and canon of, like, people talking to their families and then signal going out, people who are like, "Oh, yeah," and Lost Stars who are, like, Alderanian, and they're like, "No, like, I have to live with this now, but I'm still gonna support the Empire, like, it must be done." But, like, the concept of the Tarkin Doctrine having fear being so concentrated on these ultimate weapons that psychologically damage you before even the results happen, it's a totally different thing. The idea that Alderaan could just be gone, an entire history gone, an entire race, entire species, half species, everything gone, right? That's inconceivable. Gorman could still have the spiders, could still have the calcite, all that stuff. The people might be ruined, but they'll just be good Imperials by the end. There's no good Alderaanians afterwards other than the ones already in the military and stuff like that. Or the rest of them are dead or, somehow survived and now have to deal with living calmly and peacefully and not antagonizing in the same way that the Gorman has, right? Like, that's what Gorman's influence probably is on Alderaan, like, "Don't make a scene because look how much worse it got." And we thought we were a little bit better off than the Gormans because we had so much richer history, power, and influence and all that, and look what happened to us too, right? And it's there's no coming back from it. Gorman can always return to some level of normalcy. No normalcy for Alderaan. It's gone. So I think that's the one big thing I would say. The Death Star is just it's the ultimate summation. And if it had worked, despite all the big flaws, if it had worked, just people would fall dead on the ground. The idea of it just entering your system before the super weapon actually activated its laser and destroyed your planet. That's the whole point of the Tarkin Doctrine. Instills so much fear and so much awe, you can't do anything but almost like die on the spot. Not the same thing here with Gorman.
Well, we have about 30-ish minutes left in our stream tonight, everybody. So keep sending in those chats. We'll get through as many as we can. But if we can't get through all of them, make sure you send in a super chat. It really helps our channel out and it bumps you up to the top. If you're just joining us, please hit that like button as well. We have a lot more people watching right now than have hit the like button. So if you could hit that like button, really, really does help our channel with the YouTube algorithm. All right. So the next question here is from Batsasai again. Or no, it is. Yeah, it is Batsasai again. It says, what role and conclusion do you predict Luthen saw in the final arc? Would it be more? Would there be more of Bale in the final arc? Well, we kind of talked about that already quite a few times. But again, I think Luthen is going to have a prominent role. Obviously, he's one of the biggest characters in this show, biggest original characters, and they've got to wrap him up in some way. I could see them completely ignoring Saw. I hope they do give Saw time and an arc in the final few episodes because I think connecting him to Rogue One, it's a major plot point. How does he meet the Boar Gullet is I think the thing we're all wondering. But outside of that, I would just love to see him have a moment where we see him just get to that level and fully connect Rogue One. So if this is going to be our Rogue One prequel arc, I think we'll see more Saw. And then as for Bale, I definitely think we're going to see more Bale, just because Tony Gilroy referenced scenes on Yavin when he said that was the reason they recast. So I'm expecting more Bale, and I think we'll have a little bit more of him maybe than we've had in the last two arcs.
Yeah, I can see more. I can see kinda keeping the same steady amount. Um, it's just how will he transition into who he is in the Jimmy Smith's way. I wanna see some flair. I really do. I want it almost that you can read this last arc as, like, necessity driving him and care for Mon Mothma despite their differences, right? And then once they're actually working together, once they're both on Yavin, you see a little bit more of the cloak twirling around. You see a little bit of a wry smile as he thinks about Leia and all that. Like, I wanna see those qualities come out from Benjamin. And if they do, it's because we've had more time with him. But if it's not a lot of screen time, I expect just maybe like a couple conversations about Luthen or just where the things stand with Yavin Base. I think his most important role is already completed here in this. I feel like Rogue One versus this final arc and whatever screen time he has would still take more precedence in his overall arc as a character. So this is probably the biggest thing for him in Andor this last 2, 3 episodes, but yeah, I could see more, but I wouldn't be surprised with a little less.
Arnik Zool says, my guess, the rebellion will try to find out why the Empire was focused on Gorman and try to track the vessels or something like that. The mining vessels, yeah, I mean, that's as good of an idea as any. Again, it's always tough to predict exactly where it's going to go because of the 1 year time jump. So each one of these arcs has started with that 1 year later. So I expect this to start with no less than 1 year later. At that point, where will they be at with the Gorman massacre and how prevalent is the Gorman massacre in their actions, right? Is it still a driving force or is it something that happened and they fought a lot of battles in the last year and now they're just a machine that's operating and they're moving on to the next project. So but I think that could be a good, I mean, maybe Luthen or somebody's interested in it and trying to track down some leads about the Gorman massacre or connect Gorman with whatever this energy division is working on. I do think Lonnie is the one that's going to kind of leak some of this information the ISB is
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about to Luthen, and it's going to drive the whole thing forward as they start searching for answers around whatever the super weapon is or whatever they're building in Krennic's division. Because we've already set up Krennic and Luthen, Krennic and Mon. I think there's going to be some levels there. So I expect it to kind of go more that direction, but I would love some play on Gorman and the Calkite to kind of come back into the fold because that's something, certainly a material that we haven't really heard about in the creation of the Empire as being an important resource in the past, like Kyber was. So I'm expecting. I would like to see kind of that come full circle and see what the effects of the Calkite mining on Gorman has been for the further building of the Death Star. And I kind of expect to see the Death Star at some point, at least in this next arc as well.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same feelings there. Well, we'll see. It's gonna be an option for them, sure, but again, if they're jumping even more obviously between each episode and this final arc, it might not be worth more than just getting like a news report on Gorman and like intelligence saying we've recovered this information from an agent and then you cut and it's Lonnie, right? Like something like that. That's the max I could see. Because I could also see Lonnie with the way he's been characterized. He's terrified of Luthen, and if he has a chance of like doing something good, but also not having to deal with Luthen, he could go straight to Yavin base and go to Rebel Intelligence with Draven. I could see that being an impetus to pull in Cassian into the story in a way that doesn't run cleanly with whatever, Luthen wants to do in this final stretch of his story, so, yeah, I could see that. I think that's an option.
Patasai says, "Is there a chance to see more of the agreements and disagreements of the rebel leaders in the final arc? Any chance of Garmbel Iblis? He had a presence in Thrawn Trilogy and Legends and Force Unleashed. He offers something interesting and different enough in the way that I think Gilroy would find him interesting in Pablo Hidalgo as advisor. There, we have Rebels and Andor, yet we don't get formal creation or declaration of the alliance like there was in the Force Unleashed. I would really like to see something between. Okay, that's a different question. As for Garmbel Iblis, I would love to see Garmbel Iblis. I said it on the predictions video of like all the characters I think could be in the show. By far, out of any Legends character, he's number one for me of characters I want to see in this and who I think could actually be in this. Will we get him at this point? I don't know. I think at this point, I would have loved to see him at least teased in the Senate prior to this. Like, I would have loved to see him have a couple speaking roles with Mon and with Bale in the Senate, building up to this point. Will we see him now? Maybe. I think that's the best I can give you. He's not there on Yav, or he's not on Yavin in Rogue One when they have the scene where they're all talking about whether they should attack Scarif. So I mean, he obviously could be off somewhere doing something, but if that's the meeting of the big minds behind the Rebel Alliance and he's not there, chances are he's not a part of Canon's version. But I would love to see him come back because I completely agree. He's very much so a Tony Gilroy character, kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different characters we've already seen in this show. He's got some Saw to him, he's got some Luthen to him, he's got some Bale to him. There's a little bit of all of it combined, and so maybe it's a little bit redundant, but at this point, I don't think we'll see him, but I would love to get him. And I do absolutely think we're going to see a lot of the agreements and disagreements for the Rebel Alliance. I don't think it's going to be a smooth running machine. It's not in Rogue One, and they're frankly a little more united there than they probably are going to be at this point. They're going to be coming off the high of the off-screen declaration of the Rebel Alliance, and again, we don't get the like meeting of the minds like we do in Force Unleashed in canon, but we get like a formal declaration in Star Wars Rebels with Mon, and all the ships showing up and her on the Ghost and all of that. We get that moment. So that's basically the moment. I don't think we're going to replace it with like a specific scene like we got in Force Unleashed. So I think we're gonna have to throw that part out. But I do think he would be a really interesting character to see written by Tony Gilroy, and I do think we will see a lot of the bickering, especially after kind of the honeymoon phase of the year post Mon declaration of the Rebel Alliance. Things will start to be a little bit more tribal than maybe they were when they first started, and you'll see the different factions. Like, I think one of the most interesting parts of that Rogue One discussion is how much division there is between the politicians and the military of the Rebel Alliance. You've got
Oh, yeah. Oh,
somebody
yeah.
like and we know we're getting Radis next arc as well. So you've got somebody like Radis who's like, I say we fight, and then you have Merrick, who's the general of the Starfighter squadrons, yelling at oh god, Draven, and then you have the senators all arguing amongst themselves, and Mon trying to keep the peace between all of them. So there's such big division between all these figureheads that I expect to see a little bit more of that, um, at least in some form. But I think one thing that season two is definitely pulled back on is the idea of seeing really any big picture stuff. Like, we really have not gone big picture. It's still very much so kept its focus on what do these moments mean for Mon? What do these moments mean for Cassian? What do these moments mean for Luthen? What do these moments mean for Bix, Will, etc., etc.? So I don't think we're going to see, unless those characters are involved, I don't think we're going to see some side scene with Bail Organa and Garmbel Iblis. I don't think we're going to see some side scene with Draven and Merrick. I think it's mostly all going to be centered around the perspectives of our main and/or characters, and then eventually other canon material will just fill in the gaps, I assume. But I think that's the one thing that's double and tripled down on in season 2 is even though you have these grand moments, they're still all from the perspectives of our Andor characters, and they don't really go outside of that. You don't see Bail Organa scenes by himself. You see him with Mon Mothma. So I expect that to continue.
Yeah, I do think that's kinda how I would approach it, just watching it. I don't think we don't need a Knights of the Round Table, like, declaration, like, it's a nice sentiment for a very silly video game, honestly. It's probably some of the most mature parts of that game. It's the most grounded, at least, so it's like, cool, but yeah, I'd love to see Garm, don't get me wrong, I just think, like I said, it's probably not gonna happen. I think we're gonna see plenty of disagreements. SAW is a different wild card than EU, there's no real equivalent to SAW in the EU, and it's like, what does that really mean with the partisans? But now we know just how he's been used in this season, we need to see him again for sure, right? And then the Rogue One characters, like Galen, Bodhi, and all that, like, how much time do they take there? A lot to consider, yeah, like I said, I think if we do see stuff, we're gonna might see more like the internal leadership of the Yavin base, like Merrick and all those people, kinda in their interactions with Melshi, with Cassian, with K2 and all that, just like how did they all arrange and fit around each other. I think that's the only kinda way we'll see those disagreements. We won't see like that formal declaration because it like Liam said, I think it is really just that Mon Mothma one. We might see a hollow of it. I wouldn't be surprised if someone played it like you're saying, like, or like it's put in some sort of art and stuff, like, that'd be cool to see. But yeah, I just I don't think that was ever super necessary, and I like how it's almost in Rogue One, it's kinda changed from the Rebel Alliance. Like, yeah, we're put together, but what does that really mean? Like, we go because we have to, right? And Raditz is like, "Yeah." He kinda drags him right into it, like, once Rogue One
Mhm.
gives him no option, he's like, "That's my cue, this is what I've always wanted to, like, lead with your heart," which, that's where the pulpier side of the rebellion of the original trilogy comes through in Rogue One's characterization, especially after it's so dark and very grounded and gritty. But I think we're gonna have to see why we're not at that point yet, and we're gonna see those disagreements just between just the people who are making up eventually the whole movement, right? So how does Aratus fit in and all that? Like that, those are gonna be really interesting angles to watch for the next couple episodes here.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just from what we've seen in Star Wars Rebels, the rebellion is so different from Legends, where in Legends, once you got that formal declaration, and then obviously, throwing an even bigger wrench in the whole thing, Bail, Mon, Garmbel Iblis taken aboard the Death Star. They witness Palpatine as a Sith Lord. They witness all this other stuff that's involved in the story that really unites them, obviously, because they have a purely evil enemy right in front of them. Um, this version, the rebels are much more secretive, they're much more hidden. They like having specific strikes, and because there's so many different rebel cells, even though they become a rebel alliance in both versions, and there's different rebel cells in both versions, here in canon, they're trying to hide their numbers, and really what we're led to believe is that Scarif is the first time the Rebel Alliance is revealed
Yeah,
as, "Oh
yeah.
my god, look at how many frigates and heavy class cruisers they have, all these Mon Calamari ships. They've got X-wing squadrons. They got 3 major X-wing squadrons, a Y-wing squadron. They have such big numbers that the Empire is not expecting." And I think that's one big thing that is different between canon and Legends, and so I don't really expect any massive battles still here, because the moment they decide to truly unite, instead of just being on the same base or working for the same goals, the moment they decide to truly unite is the Battle of Scarif. Before that, everything is them working together to figure out, okay, how do we move forward here? There's still some politics involved. There's still some like trying to do small things to enhance and save the galaxy. Let's save Lothal. Let's save different random planets. It's not a galactic war yet. It's the Galactic Civil War doesn't start till the Battle of Scarif, and once that hits, then you've got a full scale battle going between the Rebel Alliance and the Imperial forces. And as we know, after the events of A New Hope and between the Empire Strikes Back and all of that, it doesn't really go that well for the Rebels. They don't have the numbers even once they reveal themselves to lead a full scale war. So yeah, I don't expect like as much as much action and unity as you see in the Force Unleashed, because the Force Unleashed definitely kickstarts things a lot faster than canon does. And so and that was a later legend story as well. You had a lot of other things around that time that don't indicate those events, and then those events happen, so it's really accelerated. So I don't expect that, but yeah, thanks for that question. Badasai also says, I would really like something between episodes 4, 5, and 6 by Tony Gilroy, although perhaps it would recontextualize and tone too much of Star Wars. I think it only would be a problem if you used the main Star Wars characters. I think if
Yeah.
you continued something with Mon, or you continued something with all those different characters, you could absolutely do a Tony Gilroy-esque show, or a show about different kind of rebel spies, and the Bothans, the whole Bothan thing with Return of the Jedi. You could do something like that. I know we had a user who commented on one of the videos. I forgot, it was predictions or my characters video, had a pretty cool idea about, oh, maybe they could use Kyle Katarn with the Bothans to steal the plans for the second Death Star, uh, and that would give him a little bit of his rollback from Legends. But there, you could do something like that, some espionage, some thriller angle with Tony Gilroy. I think between 4 and 5 and 5 and 6, that would absolutely still work. Will it ever happen? No, but I think it would. It could still work as long as you didn't like touch on the main characters of Star Wars, because that's when it starts to be really tonally different than what the core of Star Wars is.
Yeah, and I think you have to also look at, like, the arc of the rebellion, the arc of the Force kinda rebounding, and the light side kinda rising up again. Uh, yeah, it's gonna be dark, it's gonna be messy. The heroes of the rebellion, like, as Saw says, like, we're all crazy. None of us are, like, normal and, like, calm and peaceful, right? Like, this is how revolutions begin. This is how a revolutionary looks like, right? Rebel Alliance is a very militarized, very structured reconditioning of old Imperial, like, runaways and a bunch of, like, dudes who just were towing, like, stuff on their airspeeder. Like, it's a crazy melting pot. But because it's a crazy melting pot, it needs almost like a little bit more of the poetic lyrical heroes that, like, they like, "Oh, yeah, man, there's Leia going again, like, doing all the negotiating, getting his money. Oh, there's Han, he's always got some reckless mission that always turns out right," and it's like, "Luke did something weird again," but, man, like, him and the Rogue Squadron, they're all doing great, and and when they're all together, they're doing something pretty awesome, all that. Like, that's not stuff I don't think Gilroy would throw himself into, right? Like Liam said, you can take some EU characters, you can recontextualize some things, you can add or work around what's already there, but these are also periods that are so busy and because there's just so much activity that everybody's up and about. Right now, why this tone works is because the rebellion hasn't even struck. It hasn't gotten a scratch yet, right? And it's like this is the last few the moments of, freedom of, like, daylight breaking through their windows that they're seeing before they have to do something, right? And once that happens, how do you continue that? You have to have hope, you have to have belief, you have to have these things that a Cassian might deliver at this point in the rebellion, but Cassian 6, 7 years later into the rebellion would not be the same character, right? He wouldn't be a tragic character. If he'd been living that many years and been able to go with the arc of the rebellion turning to have influential figures, the Force, and all these different things, he would just be another guy. If anything, people would be like, "Ah, we're kinda trying to move past that." So that's how I look at that, and I think Gilroy could handle all this stuff, right? Some of the more Mon Mothma political storytelling, just like how these different rebel cells are operating, and especially when they're on the run between uh, episode 5 and 6 and stuff like that. Like, there's some great stuff that comics touch on that I think Gilroy would be able to enhance and could just lean a little bit more militaristic than kind of political espionage thriller vibes that he's been doing here so far in Andor. But do I really need that? I don't know.
Badasai says, where in the timeline is it placed the appearance of Saw and Rebels in relation to Andor? I remember in some he shows up bald, and in some episodes later he's longer gray hair. So the main arc of Rebels that you see him in, the Geonosis one, does take place. That's season 3, and it takes place before the Mon Mothma episode. So technically, that would be probably somewhere right before the events of the Gorman massacre. Um, Probably weeks, months before the episodes we just saw, but it would be after last week's version of Saw that we saw with the hair. So he would be bald by then. I guess later on he might regrow his hair. I don't know. There are some inconsistencies with the hairstyles, but yes, the bald version that you would see in Geonosis should technically be the version that we see next. And I would expect him to be bald as well because he's bald in Rogue One in the Jeddah stuff. So if we're connecting it to Rogue One, I would expect that interpretation of Saw to be the one we see next arc.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's gonna be interesting because he does still have he has the bald look when he's saving Jin, but then when he's dying and pulling off his Rydell or whatever at this point, he does have the hair. So I think it would still work. Again, a lot of this, like Liam was saying, it's just the nature of storytelling and kind of how we've been capturing it since the start of this live. Like it's a truth that you want to live by, but it's not like absolute, right? So animation, there's no way with their timelines or pipelines that they're going to be able to match up everything 100%. And it's a different medium altogether. So I'd attribute more of that to that. Uh, just like the differences there. Like, oh, I mean, you look at Saw Gerrera in the Clone Wars. He's not Saw Gerrera as we know him, but that was the first Saw that we ever saw. And then, wow, I said Saw that we ever saw, but well, when you see him in Bad Batch and everything, you're starting to see a little bit closer. He's getting the scar. He's getting a little closer to that voice, but do I think that Saw Gerrera really lines up well for Forrest Whitaker, especially having seen young Forrest Whitaker in films? No, not at all. But that's just the nature of the story. All right, it just that's how it's gonna be.
Yeah, yeah. I guess Saw is somebody I guess just likes to switch his hairstyle. He must be able to grow hair pretty fast. So he's like, I'll shave it and then I'll grow it out. Because yeah, I mean he goes from having hair, short hair, like army cut, crew cut, to bald in the Catalyst and in the scene where he saves Jen, to having hair in Andor, to not having hair in Rebels, then to having hair again in Rogue One. So he's just all over the place. Maybe we see somewhere in the middle. He's got like it's just starting to grow out again in the next arc as he continues to work his way towards Rogue One. But yeah, man, he can't decide whether he wants it all off or just it going completely crazy all over the place everywhere. So yeah, I mean that might be a little inconsistency, but I guess he's just likes to change his style a lot. Maybe the Rydonian voices are speaking to him, and they're like, "Shave your hair," and he's like, "All right, yeah, I think I should do that." And he takes another hit. Yeah, maybe I think that's a scene we need at some point. That's probably a deleted scene.
Absolutely, absolutely.
uh let's see. JZ11 says death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. Yeah, great part of the episode. Batasai says the KX droids were just brutal. They already enhanced their presence in the Mandalore flashback. Yeah, I love seeing them here. I mean, KX droids to me were fully enhanced in Jedi Fallen Order because
Yes,
they're very
yeah,
hard to fight.
yeah.
So
Oh my
they're enhanced there, and then now, I mean, we do see like you see Cassian shooting him a bunch of times here. It's consistent with the fact that you see K2 get shot like a million times in Rogue One, and still he's surviving for a while after that. So it's pretty consistent with that. But yeah, I loved seeing him just picking people up and throwing them around, like no guns necessary, no weapons needed, no staff, nothing. They're just like, we're just gonna pick people up and throw them and just show you that you can't touch us right now. And it's pretty consistent with what we've seen with things in Rogue One, and also with obviously the Jedi games where they're very hard to cut to pieces and kill.
Yeah, I do not love that memory being lit up again by this episode, but at least here threw people into the walls instead of smacking them down with one hand flat and killing you, and you're just unable to throw up a block because 'cause you've used it too much against them, yeah. I wanted to see a little bit more of, like, a chokehold and stuff because that's what Cassian kinda went through in that first, arc that we finally see them in Andor, so kinda seeing just kinda throwing people around was cool. It was just like I was kinda hoping to see a little bit more Fallen Order coded, like, animations kinda happen. I think that would've been a really nice touch because of how realistic that game already looks.
Swagger Like Us says a masterpiece, and Multiverse is Broken says it's peak. Yeah, completely agree with you guys. This was amongst my favorite stuff in all of Andor, if not my favorite two episodes in all of Andor. I just loved it. Let's wrap up our conversation tonight talking about the one thing that was could be a little controversial, although I don't think too many people really care about the casting K2 special number one. But we'll talk about it anyways. And again, this gives you guys one last chance to send in a few comments. If you want to support the show, super chat is greatly appreciated. If you want to just send in one last comment, you can do so. But we're going to wrap up the show tonight talking about the retcon of the K2SO origin story. and it's the first time so far in all of Star Wars canon since 2014, since the release of A New Dawn, when Lucasfilm put out a presser saying, hey, we know you love Star Wars Legends, and unfortunately, just with the continuity and the fact that it basically leaves us no room at all to make any new movies or shows after Return of the Jedi, and gives us a big play amount of content where people have to catch up now and all this stuff, and we'd have to adapt these books and stuff like that. We're gonna make that its own separate universe, and we're gonna create this Star Wars canon. And in Star Wars canon, we're gonna be even better than George Lucas's Lucasfilm was about keeping everything neat, making sure every comic, every short story, every book, every video game, every TV show, every film, all of it doesn't contradict another piece of Star Wars media, and that it's one big cohesive happy family. Well, immediately after that, for some context, we did see a few minor things happen and pop up across the inconsistencies of Star Wars canon. The first big one being the fact that in the Force Awakens novelization, Poe Dameron and Ray meet, and there's kind of like a little flirtation there, kind of a little suggestion on, oh, they could be a thing in the future. They have a meeting in Force Awakens. Then you get to the Last Jedi, and in the film, they meet for the first time at the end of the movie. So that was our first big kind of change, but it's a novelization. It's whatever. We can get past that. Then our next big one really came with Kanan and the Bad Batch introduction. It kind of retconned almost the entire first arc of the Kanan comics and the way it's presented and structured out, with Kanan now having the Bad Batch part of his story, and just that whole death of Depa Billaba and all that being a little bit bigger and grander and more TV-ified than it was in the comics. But hey, you could say, oh, it's from a certain point of view. It's a little bit different perspective, and maybe we just didn't see the Bad Batch involved in that. Maybe this is a scene that happened off the pages. Then there was the stuff from Tales of the Jedi with Ahsoka that didn't quite line up with the book, or the inconsistencies in the book, her having green lightsabers in the Siege of Mandalore versus blue lightsabers in Clone Wars Season 7. Just some minor things that you can go, from a certain point of view, whatever. This is our first true major, like old school Star Wars Legends canon tiers, where you have George Lucas canon is the highest tier, then anything made for a television show like the Clone Wars or Star Wars Clone Wars as the next highest level. And then it just keeps going on, down and down and down from there. This is our first true look at it, what Disney is now kind of that they are now taking that approach and saying, hey, something that happens in a TV show is now going to trump what happened in a comic book. And we have our first official complete retcon as Cassian meets K2 amidst the Gorman massacre on Gorman. Like you said earlier, he gets that guy he meets, one of the Gormans that he meets, part of the Gorman resistance, runs over K2 and cuts him in half with his speeder. And Cassian decides, hey, this could be something useful. I'm going to pick up the pieces and take them with me back to Yavin. And then we have K2, reprogrammed, brainwashed, and wakes up as Alan Tudyk. So this, I mean, to me, this was something I expected before Andor started. Like when they first announced the Andor show, when Alan Tudyk and Diego Luna were on stage at D23 2019, and I was in the audience, and they were talking about Andor and how it was going to be this awesome show about everything leading up to Rogue One, and they were just throwing out a bunch of stuff, and you could tell they really didn't know anything about what the show was about, but they knew they were in it. And Alan Tudyk was there, and then he's obviously not in season 1 at all, and he doesn't show up in season 2 until episode 9, technically. I expected this to happen, but then Andor season 1 did such a great job of riding the line, connecting so many things from Rebels, connecting so many things from the canon we had at the time. I kind of expected them to do some type of adaptation of the comic. Alas, they don't do it. But one of the things that might surprise you guys is I don't really care. I think the arc is really great. It's a really good really great television arc, and it works so well with it. I did feel like the K2SO thing, although the KX droids were great in this episode, it was a little forced. Like it could have happened somewhere else. It didn't like Cassian didn't really need to pick up this KX droid and take him with him. But I think after just witnessing the horrors that it could cause, and then being like, I have a chance to maybe add one of these to the rebel side, I think it makes a lot of sense, even if it does kind of come as an afterthought of that episode and just a thing that works its way up. But I think it makes sense for the show, and then the way it adds to a little bit of the hope that Cassian feels at the end after Bix leaves him. I think it works. So for me, and maybe it's just the fact that that's not one of my favorite issues of the comics. I did read it when it came out in 2017. Haven't touched it since then. Maybe don't really care that much. And it is a dangerous precedent to set. It's not a precedent I really want to set in the future. I mean, talking about Asajj Ventress and the stuff going on there, her resurrection, all that stuff with Tales of the Underworld that we're seeing now, it does make everything in canon feel a little less safe today than it was yesterday. But this has been coming for a while, and it doesn't shock me. And if there's one thing that's going to be a casualty, I'm okay with it being a one shot from 2017 that was made in the aftermath of Rogue One's success.
Yeah, I mean, again, I still hope that for all intents and purposes, Lucasfilm is still trying to honor that commitment of like everything is on the same level of canon. But like we've been talking about in the last couple weeks and predictions and lives, it's like canon has been slowly been talked about a little bit more by Hidalgo, by Filoni, that it's like, it's all translations of something that is absolute and different mediums, different storytellers that all really shapes how you look at Star Wars, right? And how it's presented to you. And yeah, I get it. I really do. It's just practical logistics of it happening at this time with media franchises, maybe is zero, right? But like, that's okay. I don't mind it. The fact that it's a one shot also helps. The fact that it's just like almost like a throw on additional piece to the Rogue One hype and everything. You're like, oh yeah, how did this happen? Cool. Bam. But that doesn't say anything about Cassian because Cassian, as he's envisioned in Rogue One, is nowhere, and I mean nowhere near as rich as what we see here in Andor. And the richest stuff that he has in the movie honestly come in his opening scene with how he's portrayed, like almost a torturous soul that he carries himself with to kill his own informant and everything. Like, how do you get to that point as a character? And you're telling me that's his introduction, right? Does that comic really do anything for me there? No, not really. It just shows him being a rebel. That's fine, I guess. But yeah, I am of the opinion that it is a good choice to have gone and done it in a more explicit way of a choice. I can't say I really understand why he felt so obligated to take the KX because I guess you can almost see like he was choked out by that one. And Niamos, right? Like, and he was like, "What have I done? Like, I've done nothing." Like, he said, "No, no, no." Like, he means like just stick around, hang around. Don't like kill me, right? Like, don't hang me, literally. And then he sees it turned around, right? Where now it's the K2 that gets taken down. And I guess in a way, maybe he feels, especially with being a separatist and how his relationship with droids in general is a little bit better than a lot of Republicans were at this point, right, in space. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think he almost looks at it like yeah, I almost thought I was gonna be killed by, like, the literal example of what the Empire's machine looks like, and then here, I see the power of man kinda controlling and shaping and destroying, so it's like, maybe he's kinda gotten, like, a mini arc b connecting those 2 things happening in front of him and seeing like, "Hey, maybe I can balance this out and find a useful tool out of this, not be so afraid of, like, the death of the Empire as I was before when I wasn't really committed to the cause." Now I'm seeing people who've only had, like, months of training at best and see what they're doing and trying to just survive here. And, it could be a very interesting angle and approach for him with everything kind of going on with how we look at K2 and that story and how it's transpired. I personally would have just loved it if they kind of skipped that portion and been like, oh, he pops up now. Right. I think that would have been fine where you could just keep the comic as is and I don't think people would really be more upset about, like, not seeing the origin other than the first 10 seconds, right? That was always an option. You kinda hope it'd be something closer to, like, Kanan and Bad Batch where it's like, it can coexist, sorta, not really, point of view. You'd love something like that there, but no, there's nothing there because I think it's gonna be something that enhances their relationship, enhances our view of Cassian, especially now that Bix is gone. How's that relationship almost kind of fill in the gaps of losing everyone from Ferrix? I'm assuming Wilmot's not gonna just stay with the Yavin group. He might go off somewhere else because he's always moving. So, yeah, I think it's gonna be very interesting to see why they made this explicit choice to do so. I agree in the sense that it is very forced almost for it to be on Gorman in the, like, dying moments of that escape from the massacre. But if the story is right, if it genuinely works to do so, and like we've seen already Gilroy do it, like, I have to recast Jimmy Smits with Benjamin Bratt because of scheduling, despite all efforts. Sure, if despite all efforts, they couldn't find a great story that could have been an adaptation of that one shot or a loose translation in the same way that we've seen the end of Dark Disciple just this past weekend be kind of verified, brought to the public masses with Tales of the Underworld. You could have done it here. Okay, you didn't. Now show me why you didn't, right? Now I need to know why you didn't, just like how I feel a lot more convinced and, okay with, like, seeing Benjamin Bratt as Bail Organa. If it meant that this was gonna enhance the character, this is gonna enhance the overall plot. If this is gonna be a choice made now, have it be as part of Gorman, what does that mean in that final arc leading into Rogue One? And if it works out great for their relationship, for Cassian's unspooling and change into this almost hardline rebel, great. If it's not, if it's just because they wanted to, I'll still always be a little bit on the fence, just like I am with the canon change and everything like that.
I think one of the more interesting things to think about with this is like what is Lucasfilm lore and like Lucasfilm Publishing's reaction to this? Do they
Yeah,
try to come up with something in the vein of Legends and be like, this is actually why this story has changed a little bit. And this is the change to it. I don't think they really can. It's completely retconned. It's just
yeah,
it's over. So I agree with most of what you're saying. If the story's right, this is a more impactful story than a one shot comic book. I hate to say it, not that comics can't be impactful stories. I love comics and I love great Star Wars comics, but a one shot comic arc for a story that could be this rich, not necessarily something that I need to hold as the end all be all for Star Wars canon. About Aside brings up the fact that they did have a different speech for Obi-Wan between A New Dawn and Rebels. And actually, that is more Rebels' fault because Rebels, I'm sure, was the one that gave the speech to John Jackson Miller to write, and then they changed
yeah.
it after. So that's more of a Filoni Rebels production thing, and that happened all the time in Legends with novelizations and adaptations. So I take like minor details like that with a very little grain of salt. No continuity is going to be perfect, especially when you have things written before and after in the timelines production and stories that might exist and then re-exist in a new form years later. No continuity is going to be perfect. We just have yet to have in canon a truly complete retcon, and this is our first complete retcon. So I think it's interesting to talk about. I'm wondering what your guys' reactions to it are because this is something that I feel like is so what's the word I want to use? It's not widely read. I don't think too many of you in the audience have read the Cassian and K2 special number 1 from August of 2017. I read it when it came out. Don't really remember much of it, other than the refresher I gave myself before the show on Wikipedia because I was like, what happened there and how did it completely retcon what I remember from that comic? But it wasn't something that I think you got to hold in the elite levels of canon tiers. And at this point now, we've got canon going on 11 years now. Legends at this point in Legends, we were at, I guess, if you want to start Legends at, I guess you can start at 76 because that's when the novelization came out. If you want to say that that original Star Wars EU started in 76, at this point they were just finishing up Return of the Jedi. It was Return of the Jedi had just ended. They were finishing up the Ewok shows and Ewoks movies and droids and stuff like that. So there's very little to the Star Wars mythology. Star Wars mythology is so much more expansive. We have so many more releases now. It was bound to happen sooner with the contradictions. But Star Wars Legends had a hard time keeping it together with the prequels coming out. And I think canon is going to have that same thing, excuse me, where the more shows, more films, more things that come out, the more creative license these creators are going to want to have. And when you have something as acclaimed as Andor and something that Disney Plus is really using as their like, look at this is the type of shows we can make, even though they've really only done it once. um, it's a standard they're trying to set, and so whatever they need to use, whatever references and callbacks and things to get the audience show up, they need to use. I don't blame them for using. I'm just worried about the precedent it sets for the future because we've I've already hated the idea that they brought back Ventress. I'm still waiting for them to give us a complete reason for why she's back, just because I purely love the ending she had. And they can definitely change my mind, but these things are starting to change, and I'm just waiting for these inevitable like wholesale changes of early canon, especially now that we're 10 years, 11 years down the line. It'll be interesting to see where they go, and it'll be interesting to see where they take it. But that's going to probably wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our reaction for Andor season 2. It was nice to get a full couple hour stream with you all talking about Andor and the amazing episodes we got this week. If you just joined us, make sure you rewind, watch the rest of the stream. We did a review at the beginning. We had a lot of fun talking with your guys' questions. Make sure you join us if you're just joining us now or you're watching on replay. Make sure you join us next week. We'll be talking about the finale, similar time as tonight. We go live around 9 p.m. Pacific time. That's usually when about the episodes end. And so we go live pretty much immediately after the episodes end. We get to discuss and talk about all the latest with Andor. It will be the finale, unfortunately, of Andor season 2. And that means that it will be our last Andor reaction show. But don't worry, we do have our live streams every single week. So once Andor ends, we're going to be back with live streams for Star Wars news and all of that type of stuff. I did put up a poll, but I kind of did it a little late. So if you guys want to vote in it real quick, you can. If not, comment below. Do you guys want us to do a live for Tales of the Underworld? We can do one maybe when Andor ends and just have a kind of a recap about that. But we can discuss all that. There's been a lot of Star Wars news coming out. We did a big 3-hour live for Star Wars Celebration talking about all the news. But there's been a lot of stuff just coming out in the last few weeks because we haven't done news. So there's a lot to talk about. So hopefully you guys join us. Make sure you check out our predictions. The predictions come out every weekend before the new episodes of Andor, so make sure you check out those. We'll have one more for you guys before the Andor show ends. If you want to see our review of Tales of the Underworld, it was posted today. You can check out our review of that. We're working on some reviews for some books as well that we got review copies for. Currently reading the Acolyte book, which did come out to the public today. And hopefully you guys are looking forward to hearing our thoughts about that book as well. Thank you so much for watching tonight, everybody, and we will see you all next week for the finale of Star Wars Andor Season 2, and I guess the series finale as a whole as well. Good night, everybody.